So, okay, I think what maybe we ought to do is we're starting to have this conversation. What if we just had it? Are you ready?
But hang on, I can't charge you with jokes and hurt your throat if we do that.
You can. It'll be fine. It's just that we won't maybe be doing it while we're also getting shot at by 3 Issei's, which I think is probably appropriate. So I don't have an intro song or anything for this, but I did set up some scenes to cover it. So welcome everybody. If you're watching this later on YouTube, I appreciate you being here. I hope that you'll come and hang out with us over on Twitch at twitch.tv/ClydePlaysLive. With me in the studio, if you want to call it that, it's also Mr. FoamingJetty. FoamingJetty is a North American CC for World of Warships. He hangs out at twitch.tv/FoamingJetty, and I think you have some YouTube videos as well, don't you?
I do. So I considered for a while putting a lot more effort into this Twitch and YouTube thing. And there's always a danger when you're a content creator of this feeling like a job. My YouTube channel has a very small number of videos on it. They're all absurdly high quality. My mom told me so.
So definitely check out Jetty's YouTube. Watch an older video if they're all older. I'm going to make an assumption just based on your comments, and then leave them a comment. Let them know that you care. That's always fun. So, folks, we're here. We're going to engage in the first ever episode of Fireside Chats, which is totally ripped off from FDR, I think. And I didn't take time to animate the fire, but maybe for our next episode, where we're going to have some guests every now and then. We might have some folks come by. Jetty is our first guest. So, Jetty, thanks for being our first guest.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Again, you made a great comment on the YouTube channel. I'm not going to go read it. If you guys are curious, you can check it out on the YouTube channel on my recent matchmaking video. But Jetty basically made some comments about skill-based matchmaking that I thought were interesting, and I wanted to just dive into that and have a conversation. I think Jetty and I often have good conversations about things about World of Warships. Usually they're via Discord or chat, whether they're in the CC Discord or just elsewhere. But sometimes they're in person, and this is as in person as we get. So Jetty, would you like to say anything about your content, where people can find you online, etc.? That way, if they enjoy the conversation today, they can find you, subscribe to your channel, follow your channel, etc.
Yeah, I mean, you already gave me a pretty good introduction. My name is FoamingJetty. I'm a North American CC for World of Warships. I started streaming on Twitch almost exclusively World of Warships content, and before changing careers, I was a teacher, and people would tell me that I had a calming voice, I have a calming stream, I don't get worked up, and it was really easy to stop and talk about basic mechanics. I'm not a pro. I'm not going to tell you like how to be super elite. I'm also not going to use words like elite unless I'm making a joke. But I can tell you about some of the basic things that a new player might want to know that an experienced player might have forgotten that they already have known for years. Like there's a gap there, and it's not fulfilled in client. It's not fulfilled by professional gamers, and so I kind of fell into a niche there, and then found a new career. I currently work in a tech startup. It reduces my time, and it means that Twitch streaming is a hobby. Made a couple of YouTube videos, stream once or twice a week, and just try to keep it chill. Stream a variety of other things if you like it, but World of Warships once or twice a week.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I do think of your channel exactly as you described it. It's pretty chill. If somebody has a question, you'll take a minute to answer that question, which I think is pretty good. I probably have a little bit more, I don't know about more, but a different sort of animation. I get a little animated at times. Not that we don't all, but definitely the both of us, I think, have channels that are, I think, good for new players and hopefully fun for experienced players as well. So I'm really glad to have you here, as we said. So the reason we're here is because I made a video for my YouTube channel recently about skill-based matchmaking and how the people are always asking for it. They want it all the time, and I don't know if that's what they really want. What do you think people want when people are yelling about skill-based matchmaking? They're throwing a solution at wargaming, but what do you think they're actually looking for?
Yeah, you work in tech, and I work in tech, and even people outside of tech know that when you try to solve a problem, what you'll get is a lot of people suggesting a solution instead of describing the problem, right? So if we were to describe the problem, for me personally, the problem is if I'm going to invest 10 to 20 minutes per game stuck in a game, I want to know that the time that I spend in that game has a consequence to the outcome of that game. I don't want to be in a game that has a predetermined win, and I don't want to be in a game that has a predetermined loss. I would rather be in a close fought, down to the wire, exciting game where my input matters.
Yeah, I think that's huge, right? Because we've been in games that, and I made the comment about this in the video as well. I just said like, hey, you know, we've all been in a game where somebody, very first chat message it goes in all chat. It's either from your team or the enemy team, obviously, because there's nobody else in the game. And they say, basically, hey, red team matchmakers decided you're gonna win this one, brr, brr, and they drive their boat into the middle of the match and die, right? Because they just decided it's not even worth playing. That's obviously incredibly poor behavior, right? We do not encourage that. You mentioned earlier, hey, I'd rather not even know what the matchmaking is because I always want to go out there and try and do my best. And I might be putting some words in your mouth there, but that idea that people would throw their ship away, that's really poor sportsmanship. We don't encourage that no matter what the odds, because like in that last battle, right? We had a really strong chance of winning that by the math, by the numbers. But what happened was we got overrun, right? We lost that battle. And so you can win any battle, you can lose any battle. But we have players who, they look at this stuff and they just decide that it's not worth it. And so the worst possible behavior is that like, I'm just throwing my ship away. I'm just going to pretend this isn't a real battle because whatever. And that's really unfortunate that we see people react that way. But it's frustration and stuff that leads to that. I don't know how to cure those people. And I don't think that's my job. I don't think we have to.
No, but I think there is a strong minority. I'm sure it's probably a minority. The number of people who play this casually and without ever interacting with Twitch or forums or anything else is far larger than those of us who are, you know, participating in this community. But the minority of players who care about this have gone to lengths to try to measure it before. Like, you have matchmaking monitor, which I refuse to use, but a lot of people will use it. And I will have clanmates who will tell me which games we are likely to win and lose before we start the match, both in clan battles and in randoms. And I don't want to hear it. I'd much rather do my best. It sounds defeatist to hear those things, but the hunger is there. And it's not just prognostication, like, I want to know if I will win or not. It's, I want to know if I should try or not, because it is an investment.
Yeah, these games are long, right? Like, you know, you can go and play first-person shooters, things like that, and the matches are really quick, right? Remember, like Counter-Strike, when it's 4v4 and you're dead and you're out, right? That bomb defusal mode, right? Very quick. So when you log in and you're gonna go play a full-on match of World of Warships, it takes a long time, and so you want it to be worth your time, as you said. By the way, chat, we are going to try to keep our eye on chat and answer some comments and some questions. Matchmaking in World of Warships, though, doesn't work properly, according to my recent study. So if you go watch that video, I go and I do a bunch of math with the numbers we have available, and I say, this is not good enough, is really what I said. I think I even say that in the video. I said, this isn't good enough. I think we can do better. And I went and looked at a bunch of reasons, coming from the software development background, right, from a technology background, which you have as well. I looked at a number of things there that might be reasons why we don't fix this, and that's kind of this bottom item on the list. I think we should talk about those, because I think people ignore all that, and we shouldn't, but we can certainly walk through it. I want to talk a little bit about how matchmaking works, I think, if I'm looking at my outline over here, which we're already way off script, by the way, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean,
we should stay
you did
off
a good
script.
job
It's all good.
planning, and so I'm gonna let you.
We'll wander.
I mean, I'll let you be burdened by how far away from the plan we are. How about
Yeah,
that?
exactly. You should just be here and be you, and we'll talk through stuff, and I'll try to do the same as well. Here's the matchmaking workflow. This is what happens when you hit the battle button. So you and your friends, you get into a ship, and I explained this in that YouTube video again. I should probably just stop referring to that and have a new conversation. But you and your friends get together in a division, or you don't. You just play on your own. And by the way, the Who Jam reminds us, this is a great comment, Who Jam, thank you, that matchmaking is different in every different game mode. And that's true, or at least in various different game modes. This is the matchmaking for random battles that we're talking about today. Go ahead.
And I'd like to add something to that. It's true that the matchmaking is different in different match modes, but Wargaming has told us with regularity that they consider randoms to be the primary mode of World of Warships. And it's the mode that ships are balanced around. It's the mode that rewards are balanced around. So if you care about skill-based matchmaking or matchmaking being balanced, first you have to define what balance means, but however you would like it to be balanced, randoms is the mode that matters.
Yeah.
If that's important to you.
No, I think that's worth talking about. When they talk about, like you said, balancing ships, they balance them for randoms. When we talk about clan battles, right? People always like, oh, this game's so imbalanced, blah, blah, blah. Because they have to ban all these ships for clan battles. Otherwise it doesn't. Well, it's because clan battles is not what World of Warships is about primarily. It's one of the things Warships is about. But as you just pointed out, the thing that this game is really based around is random battles. And so that's what they're trying to build the game for. It's built for randoms. And so ships that are really powerful in randoms might not be so great in clan battles, and more likely ships that are really kind of mediocre in randoms might be really powerful in clan battles. Sorry, go ahead.
I do want to loop back to Hujum's point though, because I think we should discuss the matchmaking in different game modes, but
sure.
let's continue to discuss this graphic.
I'll walk through the graphic, and then I'll throw it to you. We can talk about the other ones as well.
Yep.
So I'm gonna oversimplify. Wargaming made a 15-minute video about this that's actually really good. If you're interested, I'll put a link to that in the description on YouTube, and maybe I can track it down when Jetty's talking a little bit later and drop it in here as well. But it's already linked elsewhere on my YouTube channel as well. But basically, you hit the battle button, and then they start trying to put you into these baskets of possible games that might exist. They put your ship into all of these different baskets, and whichever one of those baskets that your ship is in, because you're in multiple, fills up with players first, that's the one that launches into the match, and you go off. And then they pull you out of all the other baskets and put other ships in there to try to build the other matches for other players waiting in queue. Wargaming talks a lot about how long that process takes, and because they're very sensitive to the idea that if matchmaking takes too long, then people will be unhappy and it's unhealthy for the game. And I do think that matchmaking speed is really important. I have played games where the matchmaker takes a long time, and when I was a new player in those games, I was unhappy and I didn't play those games for very long. So I think for getting new players in, that matchmaking time is probably pretty critical. I think for old time players, I have 12,000 battles. You have 14,000 battles, Jetty. You and I, we could wait an extra 3 minutes in matchmaking and we'd be fine. We're already committed. We're into this thing, right? Don't let me speak for you if you disagree.
No, I think
new
prefer
players, no, you prefer me speaking for you? Sorry, I was waiting for the rest of your sentence.
No, go ahead.
No, that's it. I'm done. Or at least for that, if you had a thought about whether or not you'd wait an extra 2 minutes in a battle. Maybe.
Oh, I absolutely would. I've said frequently. I don't think I've ever posted on the forums. So thank goodness there's not a written record there. But I've said often that if the choice is between improving match quality and speeding match times, I would always prefer match quality. If the choice is between winning more often and having a more fun experience, I'd always rather have a more fun experience. I'm willing to give up my win rate. I'm willing to give up my matchmaking time. I'm willing to give up even ship composition mirror matches if it makes the time I spend in the match more enjoyable.
Yeah, I agree. And it's because I've already kind of decided that I like World of Warships. Obviously, in spite of its flaws, right? Absolutely nobody should walk around and pretend that this game is incredible or perfect or anything, because it's not. What it is, though, at least for me, is it's unique, right? And so I haven't found a game that I like as much as World of Warships that does what World of Warships does. I like other kinds of video games, right? But this one is unique in at least in my estimation, in the way that I've wound up playing it. And so I would totally wait an extra 60 seconds, an extra 2 minutes or whatever. But yeah, it's not probably healthy for new players coming to a game to wait too long in randoms. I've seen forum posts, I've seen Reddit posts where players are like, hey, why does matchmaking take so long? And it's because they're playing tier 3 or tier 4 and matchmaking takes forever down there. And they're like, I just thought maybe, I literally read this post recently when I was doing research for this. Somebody said, hey, why does matchmaking take so long? I don't really want to get involved in this game if it's like dead already, right? Like, I've read that post. So I can't remember if it was on the forums or on Reddit, right? So obviously, I think that time sensitivity is probably a real thing. Anyway, after you get thrown into some baskets, one of those baskets fills up with players. Wargaming does a process they call final balancing. And in final balancing, this is probably less relevant today than it was when the game was new. but they take a look at the nationalities of classes of ships that are the same tier. So in other words, if you're looking at tier 7 destroyers that are in a match, if one team has 3 American destroyers and one team has 3 French destroyers, they'll try to distribute those ships by nation across the 2 teams. And the reason why that used to be a big deal is back when there was like 4 countries in the game, each nation had a fully unique flavor. And as we've added more nations, as we've added more ships over the years, those national flavors have gotten a little bit narrower. They've gotten a little bit blurred together. And so they're a little bit less unique. At least this is Clyde's opinion we're getting into now.
And for the avoidance of doubt, those flavors include things like unique access to radar, unique access to smoke. Those were important differentiations.
Hull repairs on destroyers, right, in particular, right? Things, all of those kinds of things which were totally unique. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And you came out and said it directly. I appreciate that. And so nowadays, like, man, that's less a thing, right? We've got a bunch of countries that have radar cruisers, right? So you might have radar cruisers from America and from Russia and from the United Kingdom, and they might be flipping those ones around. But those gimmicks, those, to use Big Data's term, those gimmicks or those attributes, those unique behaviors are no longer they're no longer as unique. And so, you know, rebalancing those kinds of ships in that way is probably, it probably helps at least in some way, but it's not as big of a deal as it used to be.
And it's still the case that we hear lots of complaints, at least I do, in games.
Oh, I do.
When one side has 2 more raiders than the other, you will hear complaints in chat. So I think that this is, it's important to talk about for 2 reasons. One is that there's a reason we wait as long as we do in matchmaking to start with. And 2 is that Matchmaker is not a monolith, right? It hasn't been this way forever, and it is not required to be this way forever in the future. Matchmaking has gone through several iterations of improvements, first regarding how far apart tiers are allowed to be, then regarding how different classes are represented in opposition to each other, so that there's not a whole bunch of destroyers versus a whole bunch of battleships, then regarding the nationalities of the ships on each team. Each of those matchmaking improvements is intended to tackle some interpretation of balance. So the fact that people still complain that it's not as balanced as it should be, and I personally agree with them, I think that that's a valid complaint, but it's worth considering the history of improvement after improvement after improvement over a long period of time. And I love that maybe we're ready for another improvement, because I think we're not there yet.
Yeah, I agree. This graphic, oops, it's over here. This graphic on the other side here is just some of the matchmaking improvements I was able to mine from patch notes and stuff. And these go all the way back. I think one of the ones that's on here says, okay, guys, fine, we won't put 3 aircraft carriers in a battle anymore, right? Do you remember that? Do you remember 3 aircraft carriers in a battle? And this, I can't.
Hang on. You mean just a moment ago? 3 E-Says and it's I'm sorry, I'm done.
Oh, Zing. Well, you know what? I've actually got some data from that same data set about hybrid battleships that I can't wait to get into and talk about, but I haven't got it all sorted out yet. So maybe we'll talk about that later. But, you know, so this is just, I keep pointing the wrong direction. This is just some of the changes that Wargaming made to the matchmaking over the years. And they've made a ton of them. If you actually go through all the patch notes and search for matchmaking, you'll be surprised how many times they've adjusted, tweaked, fine-tuned, changed settings for, etc. One of the things, and the very bottom bumper sticker that's on this poster says most of the changes were about class, matchmaking speed, not ship speed, but matchmaking speed, or tier, right? They want to make sure that you won't be 2 tiers apart as often as you used to be. They want to make sure that CVs didn't used to be, or was it always this case that CVs would try to match them up across one another, and then they wouldn't always, if they needed to opt out of that to get a match made faster. So you could have 2 CVs on one team and 1 on the other. This was like really early days.
So I'm going to try to...
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to try to summarize this, and I don't know, I'd be curious to know if you agree with me or not. But
yeah, sure.
All of these changes are a particular form of balance. Wargaming is balancing the composition of the fleets that fight,
to it.
Not the composition of the players that fight.
Yes, that's exactly right. So what they're doing is, and this goes back to another idea. So you've jumped to the exact point that I think is really valid or valuable for people to understand, is they're balancing based on ship and ship capability. we said earlier that they balance, and again, this is all, by the way, this is all just Clyde and Jetty talking. We are not Wargaming employees. We don't know how they actually think internally. However, this is all mega speculation zone and just kind of our experience with the game over a combined almost 30,000 battles, right? They're balancing the ships. They're not balancing the players' capabilities. And when we talk about how the ships are balanced for randoms, they want a tier 8 ship to be a tier 8 ship to be a tier 8 ship to be a tier 8 ship, right? So ships that are tier 8 and don't have radar have something else. Ships that are tier 9 ships but don't have a hull repair have something else. And I believe, again, the world according to Clyde, I believe that Wargaming believes that they've balanced the ships to within a reasonable range of one another by tier. And so when they make changes to make sure classes and tiers are appropriate, it's because they're relying on the fact that they think they've already balanced the ships by tier against one another. Now again, Clyde's opinion, not a fact. And we know that the power levels of ships are a little bit different, right? Nothing is perfect. If it was perfect, it'd be super boring. And thankfully it's not. But you've hit it exactly on the head, where they're balancing the ships, they're balancing the fleets, not the players' capabilities. I'm pausing.
Yeah, and we can go back and talk about how in other modes they have to balance in different ways. I don't know if we're ready for that yet.
Let's do that. No, let's do it. We're off script already. Let's just go.
Yeah, so, before we talk about ranked and clan battles, which are the two battle modes where skill is supposed to have an effect, and there are other smaller modes where skill is supposed to have an effect. Should we talk about matchmaking in general, how it is interpreted across a variety of games, some examples of matchmaking?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what are we trying to do when we're making a match, right? We're trying to put some players together to play a battle, and there's a lot of concerns there.
So if you look at forums, forum posts on Wargaming while they last, or on Reddit or wherever else, sometimes you'll see references to a metric called the ELO rating, which is a reference to chess, which is a score generally between about 1,000 and about 3,000. It doesn't have really defined boundaries, and it relates to how likely somebody is to win against someone else. And so people with really high ELO ratings win a lot of the time. If someone with a high ELO rating meets someone with a low ELO rating, there's a mathematical formula for who is supposed to have the best chance of winning, and that means that if you put people with high ELO ratings together, then they have supposedly equivalent chances of winning against each other, right? It's a way of measuring skill.
Right.
Wargaming doesn't have that. As far as I can tell, Wargaming doesn't have that in any of its modes. And I would love to hear if chat disagrees or if you disagree, Clyde. Wargaming has a much more visible ranking system of tiers and ranks within tiers. So in clan battles, you have between Squall, Gale, Storm, Typhoon, and Hurricane, and then you have tiers within those. And as you win, you gain points, and as you lose points. That's referred to usually as a ladder system instead. You can infer kind of who's supposed to win based on where they are on the ladder, but there's not a direct comparison of like an ELO rating and a percentage chance of winning per se. So if you look at ladder systems, like StarCraft has a ladder system. There are a lot of popular multiplayer games that have ladder systems. Some of them have ladder systems and ELO systems as well. If you look at
I think League of Legends has an ELO rating, or there's might be an MMR rating, which I think is just a different algorithm for that same concept. Real quick, Ship of Mighty PP said, how do you spell that? Is it ELO or ILO? It's ELO, and it's actually the last name of the mathematician who proposed this system. So he was a big chess nerd, and he came up with the mathematical formulas that Jetty was talking about, right? And Jetty, you touched on this a little bit. Maybe you described it well enough. But basically, I think higher numbers are better in the ELO rating system. And so, like, if I had a score of 1,200 and Jetty had a score of 1,400, and I lost to him, I would lose a few points. But if he lost to me, because my score would be lower, he would lose more points than I would lose. And so it's a way of kind of auto-balancing that based on the way the battle goes, and that ELO rating is based on historical performance by comparing your results with other players that have other ELO rating scores or whatever. And then MMR, I don't remember if MMR is an acronym. It can't be a word by itself, so it must be an acronym. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's another rating system.
I think it's matchmaking rank.
Is that all it is? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it can be a direct synonym for ELO. Like, I think an ELO system can be described as MMR, but I think also there are a lot of adjustments. And when you look at the matchmaking systems for different popular games, you very often will see we started with this kind of ELO idea, and then we started altering it so that it would, be tailored to our game. And I think we should come back and talk to this tailoring for the game experience you want, because I think that's important for World of Warships. But in some games, the actions you take in the game might affect your MMR in a way that's not explicitly tied to winning or losing, but tied on the contributions you make. And I think that's a lot more relevant in team-based games where your contribution might be high even if you're on a losing team. In World of Warships, we have kind of, I think, blunt tools where if you, like, for example, in ranked, if you win, you gain a star. If you lose a star. If you lose, but you are the best on your team, then you save your star. Like, those are very blunt instruments. But what they're trying to get at is that it's possible to have a good contribution on a losing team.
No, that's exactly right. And when you talk about them being blunt, right, it's like, it's just such a coarse adjustment to the result, right? We know that your contribution is on this almost infinite scale of variability between being the best or the worst player in terms of contribution for that, right? And they go, well, okay, whoever the best dude was, that person gets to keep their star, I guess, right? And all that is okay, the algorithm or the match itself came out, there was a result, all these guys get stars and all these guys lose stars, except we'll pick one person and say that they get to keep a star. And the way they pick that person is they use, I was just gonna say, is they use the base XP, because that's the way that Wargaming kind of measures your in-game performance. But go ahead if you had a thought.
Yeah, and the base XP is an aggregate of the kinds of actions that Wargaming thinks should win games, right? Doesn't always work out that way, but it should be. But before we talk about that, I mean, since we're talking directly about ranked, let's just be clear about some of the consequences about ranked.
Yeah.
In ranked, the majority of players in any given match will not lose rank, right? Half the players win, half the players lose, but not half the players lose a star. And as a consequence, if you grind ranked enough, theoretically, as long as your win rate is close to 50-50, you should rank out. The question is not, will you rank out? The question is not, are you skilled enough to be in gold? That's not the question at all. The question is, are you willing to stick it out long enough to generate the wins required to eventually end up in gold? And this is one of the reasons that I don't play ranked, because I look at the system and I say, I meet the same ratio of potatoes and non-team players in gold that I meet in silver. They've just taken longer to get there. They're very stubborn potatoes, but they are potatoes nonetheless. And that's okay. Like, if you like the small format of games and you like the matchmaking restrictions that are in place for ranked, you should play ranked for the matchmaking restrictions and for the experience. And sometimes I do.
I want to jump back and talk a little bit about what you said, because I think for the more math-minded among us, we're like, oh yes, of course, Jetty, yes, more than half. But for those of us who are maybe a little more casual players, which means you're probably not, if you're fully casual, you're probably not watching Twitch streams about World of Warships. So folks here are fairly dedicated, but just from the math perspective of it all, let's say it's 7v7 ranked, could be 6v6, but if it's 7v7, that means 14 players go into a battle and 8 players advance a star. Even if all things are completely equal and totally random, you're right, you'll float to the top. Now, things are not perfectly equal. That 8th guy who gets to save his or her star, that 8th ship, I should say, that 8th player who gets to save his or her star, happens to be the person who contributed the most to the losing team. So it's not fully random, right? The player who goes in and bobbles around and their ship rolls over and they sink early in the match is not likely to be the top player on their team. So it's not fully random. But if you're on
they are likely to be on the winning team.
Yeah, that's
a little bit less than half the time.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
and the other interesting fact, if you want to be really dark about this, which we have to be careful not to put on our tinfoil hats, but let's fully role play the dark response. That dark response is the person who has the highest base XP on the losing team can be the reason for losses repeatedly, because they can engage in actions that result in their teammates dying in order to have the highest XP remaining.
Yeah.
They can leave their teammates hanging. They can refuse to properly let their health pools get traded. They can farm from the back so that they have lots of damage. They can wait for the battle to play out, and they can grab solo caps. Like, if you really want to game the system of ranked on the winning side and on the losing side, that is possible. Now, I personally don't think that that's very common. I think that we're probably afraid of it happening a lot more than it happens. But all of those things contribute together to form a system where me as a player, I don't feel like the players in ranked get differentiated by skill to a large degree. You maybe have the very lowest win rates at the bottom, including the people who give up before they climb all the tiers. And you may have the very highest players at the top. But the other thing that's true about ranking out is you're not allowed to play anymore. So the very highest skill players, after the first few days or weeks of ranked, will no longer be playing ranked, which just resets the scale and the goalposts for everybody else. And for those reasons,
just to hit that point slightly harder, I'll throw the mic right back to you.
Yeah.
But you just said that your best players, if they speed run and finish ranked, they all leave ranked immediately, and then you're just left. And every player that leaves, the skill pool gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, so that late in that ranked season, it's just the guys who haven't been able to rank out, right? Or players like me who only play bronze ranked because of the same reasons that you've talked about, how silver and gold is just super frustrating. And so I don't bother. I just play in bronze where I can really influence the game, which is me just farming steel. I just got a rake and I'm just pulling steel towards my account, and not very much for that matter. But back to you.
Yeah, and I guess the punchline for me is that I don't play ranked because I don't think that it does what it says on the tin. And I care about that.
That's really, really interesting.
Yeah, I care about the cognitive dissonance that causes me pain, that I should be able to play with people of my rank, but I'm only allowed to play with people who happen to have had the same amount of stars with me, regardless of how good they actually are. Now, that's an emotional problem, right? And the good news is I can play.
But it's a video game. All the problems are emotional.
Game. That's true. But
the
at the end of the day,
of this software is to give us happy time emotions. That's what it's for.
What?
Except for World of Warships does both. It gives you sad time emotions and happy. I mean, you're supposed to probably have highs and lows, but like, this is for fun.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and give the caveat to this, and this is what I tell people all the time. If you are a newer player and you're hearing us talk, again, Clyde has 12,000 games. I have 14,000 games. We know what we like. We know what we don't like. We're complaining about things from a jaded veteran perspective.
Sure. Sure.
There are people I know who refuse to play ranked because they are afraid that their teammate will be mad that they were there because they won't pull their weight. They'll be afraid that it's a high-stakes environment, and the very reason that I dislike it is that it's not a high-stakes environment. It's just randoms with less people and some funky star mechanics, but it does come with some very good rewards. And if you haven't tried ranked yet, and you like the matchmaking rules for the season, for me, not having a carrier in a small field, not having subs in a small field.
Yeah, the ships that are available, the tier that's available, not the matchmaking itself, but the
regardless
configuration of the season. Yeah.
Yeah, regardless of your skill, you should be trying ranked. You should bring home some of that steel. You should bring home some of those rewards. You'll win maybe a little bit more than half the time, maybe a little bit less than half the time. You should not care about the results, and you should not feel judged by your team, because it's not a skill-based matchmaker. It's just a ranking system with some funky star mechanics and really good rewards. So don't let that dissuade you.
Yeah, go play ranked. Ranked, to be fair, ranked is an interesting mode. But like, and I'll give you my journey as a player. I played World of Warships from the very beginning almost. I wasn't in beta like some of you guys probably were, but I started playing in September of 2015. So I missed it by a couple of months, I think, a few months. But I started playing. I found out about ranked whenever that happened. I don't remember exactly. I decided I would try some ranked, and I thought, oh, this is cool. It's competitive. It reminds me of what I thought it was like StarCraft ranked, right? Or StarCraft ladders,
exactly.
right? And I was like, oh, cool, I'll do this. And then I learned how it really worked, and I said, oh, okay, well, that's just as good. That'll work. So I kept playing ranked, and I would get into silver, and I would get really frustrated for all of the reasons that at the time I didn't understand. And I was cheesed about it. I was like, why is this like this? And then I realized that it just made me angry. And for me, games are, I didn't want to be angry. I didn't want to be a salty MFer. Like, that was not my goal. So I was just like, forget it. I'm not going to play ranked anymore. Ranked sucks. And I quit playing ranked. And I was like, ranked is so dumb, blah, 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 this competitive mode, how terrible is this? And then I realized, I said, oh, Wargaming's not even trying to make it a proper competitive mode.
Mm-hmm.
They're not even trying.
That's not the objective.
And once I realized that, I said, okay, as long as I understand what ranked is, then I can go participate in it. I can do it again.
I haven't gotten over that yet.
And that's fair. I think different people are going to react to that differently. But for years, I was just like, that they think it's a competitive mode, blah, blah, blah. And then when it finally clicked with me that they don't think it's a real competitive mode, they think it's random. Sometimes they test submarines in there, cough, cough, or whatever, right? I was like, oh, it's just randoms with fewer players where I can influence the game more? That's okay. And I decided that I could go back to it as a way to get steel, but not as a true competitive mode. And once I just accepted it for what it was, then I was fine, right? I was able to be the prodigal son and come back to it.
Could we, I see a couple of really interesting comments. Brand
please,
says,
hit 'em.
If they remove the rank reward, would you still be playing it? For me, the answer is yes. But that's because I'm a salty old player and I don't play ranked for the rewards. I play ranked if it has an interesting matchmaking setup. So I'll give you an example. Tier 7 is a tier with some interesting ships. Tier 8 is a tier with some interesting ships, but those tiers constantly get bullied when up-tiered. If you give me a ranked season that is tier 7 surface ships without carriers and without submarines, I'll play that for the fun of it. I'll get a little bit of reward as a result, but because I'm a salty old player, I don't really care about the reward. It doesn't buy me anything. If you were a newer player, you might care for both reasons, but I personally don't.
No, I like that too. Boats like Haida, right? Haida is a great boat, but I hate fighting tier 9s in my Haida, right? Tier 7, all of the tier 7 premium battleships are so much fun in a tier 7 ranked season, but they're rough in a tier 9 battle in randoms. I agree. That's one way that you'll easily lure me in, is if I can go play my 7s, my 8s, and these days to a certain extent your 9s. For sure. That's a great question from Brand. Obviously, I play more ranked because of the steel, but I'm kind of weird where I can play randoms forever and it's kind of fun. But I love single tier matchmaking, and one of the only places we can get it is in ranked.
Railway says, controversial opinion, because it has less players, ranked is a better place to learn how to play. It's definitely a better place to be told how to play.
Yes.
But jokes aside, I agree. Ranked and clan battles are both excellent places to learn how to play because you don't have to manage as many things at once. Again, I'm going to hit on something, maybe you'll get tired of me saying it, but carriers and subs have a kind of an outsized influence when they're balanced for 12v12s. And that can lead to some unfortunate exceptions to the rule. But I think that smaller engagements can give you more time to think about the strengths and weaknesses of your ship, your shell choices, your armor facing, your map position. I think both ranked and clan battles are a great place to learn how to play.
Yeah, I agree. I would say that if your goal is to learn how to play, I agree easily. If your goal is to learn if your goal is to win while you're learning how to play, it can be really frustrating if you're a new player with a lower win rate than you want, a lower win rate than you will have, because you are 1/6 or 1/7 of the team. And if you go in there and do a new player thing, you potato it up and die, then you're giving your team a hard time. That said, if you can get past that part and you get to that active learning phase and you're taking away valuable lessons from it and coming back at the end of each match, you go, okay, I died early. What did I do 2 minutes ago? And how can I not do that in the future? Why did that get me killed? And when you own, and I think I said this in the matchmaking video, if you own those decisions, that will be a huge way. It's a great school, basically, for learning. And one of the things that you talked about was the limited number of players, because that limited number of players is kind of what happens on one half of a random battle map, right? It's 6 or 7 players on one side, and they're scrapping, or maybe 8, across both teams, and you're fighting. And so you can take those lessons that you've learned there and apply those back to larger battles as well. But no, I think it's good. It could be potentially bad as well, where you might throw a ship away because you're new and because you're learning, and so you'll lose a battle. But it's still a great lesson, Yeah, go ahead.
If you do that, I think in a smaller field you might be able to better differentiate cause and effect. In theory, if you're paying attention.
True. I agree. Easily. Yeah.
If you make a mistake in ranked, pay attention to why, because there should have been a direct cause.
Yeah, I always tell new players, as soon as you're dead, think about what happened in the last 2 or 3 minutes, because you did something that got you killed. It's your fault, right? Sometimes you got ganged up on and you loaded into a match and there's 3 Isseis and they beat the crap out of you, right? But most of the time, you're in a situation where you did
in that battle.
Wrong.
Neither of us died. Just saying.
We didn't. We did great. We did great. I was very pleased with how that battle went.
Penny says,
go ahead. Can I grab one and then we can go grab Penny's
comment? Go for it.
Just trust anyone said, I try to avoid when it's heavy tier 10 because I'm usually grinding lines that are lower than tier 10. That's another great place to go and grind ships because, again, you can have a good influence on the game. You can earn good XP in ranked. You're also getting steel, which helps you grind ships that aren't on a tech line but are in the game for free as well. So good comment from Trust. What do you got from Penny?
Yeah, before I go to Penny's, Ship of Mighty PPU has something similar. Ranked is a good place to get really hard campaign tasks done. It depends. There are tasks where you need to get the maximum number of shell hits. I think that more often than turning to ranked, I'd turn to co-op to get the combination of exact ingredients I want. But it's true that in a smaller field, if you manage it just right, maybe you can get some things done that would be hard in a big field. And Penny says, now I shall give ranked a try, which makes me happy.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Pac Manly says, I have a question about ranked. This is, I think, one that's probably a discussion. I don't think there's a straight answer to it. I've never bothered ranking out. I usually get into silver, farm my steel every sprint. Maybe I push at the end of the season to get into gold. But I'd like to do it at least once. Is it generally easier to do that early in the season or later in the season if you're maybe a slightly above average player? I've only ranked out once, and I ranked out in that weird season where they let you take you could take duos in, and I think it was tier 6 or 7. That was the only season I ever ranked out on, and it was one of the seasons where they didn't give you a ranked token or anything. And I don't remember how I did it. Have you ever ranked out? Did you used to rank out when you played ranked more actively?
I have ranked out. Have I ranked out?
And chat, by the way, if you have thoughts on this, share your thoughts as well. While JD's talking.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't play ranked very often. I used to play it more, and I don't know if I've ever ranked all the way out in the current system. I know that I've gotten to 1 on some of the older systems, but in the current system, I don't know if I ever have. And I don't know what I think about, is it easier earlier or later? I feel like it's more frustrating later on as you watch a large field of the team be drained of the tryhards early in a season, right? But for that very same point, the counterpoint is your actions have more value. So I don't know what I think.
Yeah. I mean, you might be with players who can carry you more, but those same players are going to be on the enemy team early in the season, and they will kill you more as well. So, I don't know if there's a definitive answer to that one, Pac. I think that's kind of a tricky question, actually. And I think what you do is you just try a season. I've had ranked seasons where I logged in and I just could do no wrong. I won every battle. I had a 75% win rate for the whole season, and I played up, at least maybe deep into silver back in the day. I've had seasons where I log in and I literally cannot win a match. So for me, it feels relatively arbitrary. And I think that's part of the skill. I love that we're diving into ranked, which isn't really about, random battle skill-based matchmaking, but it does speak to matchmaking in the game. And I think it's worthy of a little bit of discussion. But I do think that it feels relatively arbitrary to me, but I think that's also part of the problem with the way they're matchmaking. Now, I want to throw a question to you, or if you guys go ahead, take that.
Well, I was gonna tie this back into the main thread, but before I do that, ask your question.
Okay. This is kind of jumping back into the main thread as well a little bit. ELO ratings designed for chess, or ELO, I shouldn't say ELO because it's a guy's name. ELO ratings are designed for chess, a 1v1 competition. What are some of the challenges? Yeah, what are some of the challenges that could exist for trying to matchmake a team of 12 players against 12 other players with players having individual ELO ratings? There may be some reasons why Wargaming hasn't tried this already.
Yeah, so in a lot of the most common and biggest games where you see skill-based matchmaking, you see a lot smaller teams, or even 1v1s, right? So StarCraft has a ladder for 1v1. They have ladders for up to 4v4, where you can be in a party or not. Another game that I have played a lot and have personal experience with is Rocket League, where they have an MMR, a hidden MMR, and then they have a visible league system. The visible league system looks a lot like World of Warships league system, but the league system isn't actually controlling your match. Your MMR controls who you actually match up against. So you can be Diamond 2 and someone else can be Diamond 2, and you might be given a match against a Diamond 1 because you have similar MMRs and they're climbing the ladder really quickly. Those games, even though they go up to 4v4, are much easier to matchmake than a 5v5, a 7v7, a 12v12. Even in Rocket League, where you have 3v3s, some of the adjustments that you see in Rocket League are cases where a division, what do they call it, in a party, I guess, in Rocket League,
or a team, or whatever you set up,
a party in Rocket League where everyone is partied up in advance and matchmakes together is given a difficulty modifier and matched against individuals of higher MMRs to offset the coordination that they would have. So take that back to World of Warships, and you have how many divisions can possibly play? I've seen 6 or 7 divisions in the same game across both teams. That's going to be a mess. You have the case where if I'm in
that's an interesting concern. So to call that out very, very directly, what you're saying is because these guys are in divisions, they would coordinate very well, and that would enhance their abilities beyond their individual ELO ratings. And so there needs to be an ELO, a skill, I'll say a performance modifier because of divisions. And then you said there could be 5, 6 divisions in a game, which means you need to have 5 or 6 modifiers for all of these coordinated players who are probably on Discord, they're on voice, they're doing good things, etc. and so on. No, that's crazy. I had not considered that, even though we have talked about how divisions are very powerful, right, in the past on other shows and things.
Yeah, I think that all of us intuitively know when we face a division in high skill ceiling ships that we're going to be in for a rough time. Particular compositions are dangerous, but even a random combination in skilled hands, when you see a division, you pay more attention because we know that has an effect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excuse me. The other thing that we're
both dying here. Do you need a minute to deal with stuff? Anyway.
The other thing that I see from Rocket League is if I am, let's say, Diamond 2, and I play with my Platinum 1 teammate, who I play with Rocket League all the time, the average of our individual matchmaking ratings is used against the average of an opposing team's rating. But when we get rewards for that, my points in the hidden MMR, my points, because I'm a higher skilled player in the average team, are adjusted by a small amount, and his points are adjusted by a large amount, and you end up getting what's called MMR compression, where everyone in the team starts to kind of converge in MMR
closer together.
As long as they don't change partners, right? Now, if you could guarantee in World of Warships that you're constantly changing partners, then that might not matter. But once again, in a lot of these games with smaller team or even individual formats, recording the win is enough to differentiate who played more effectively. In World of Warships, that's not going to be the case.
It gets harder with the larger pool of players, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So 3 people, I had a game yesterday where myself and my division mate had 9 kills between us. We had every kill registered on the team.
Me and Brand did that last week, I think.
How do you determine what kind of rewards to give out in that case?
Yeah, like how does that match? And are kills even the score of the measure, right? I think it's part of the measure, and we've talked about that a little bit in this stream already. But
Yeah,
but you can use that as a yardstick and say, but seriously, guys, we got 9 kills. How could we literally have even been in that much of the ocean to get all those kills? Like that's almost impossible.
But Wargaming has a measure for that. They have measures that we're aware of, and they have measures that we're probably not aware of. So you talked about this in your video. Measures that measure contribution in a more complex way than simply measuring the win.
Right.
So we have average XP in the ship, average XP on the person, average XP. Did you have another one? Average XP for the team.
There's account and ship XP. There's battles in ship and battles on your account, which is a terrible predictor, it turns out. And then we had win rate in both ship and win rate on your account as well. Those were kind of our predictors. And then, of course, those are parts of the result as well, right? Like you got a new battle, great. You won or you lost, great. And you got this much XP or you got that much XP, right? So those are not only there's something that speaks to your historical performance, but each match provides an update to that value because of what happened in that match, basically.
And this speaks to my comment that I made on your video very, very directly. And this is something that I was responding to in Reddit posts and forum posts that I read. I've heard people say that if you institute skill-based matchmaking in World of Warships, then everybody ends up matching with people of equivalent skill. That causes win rates all to slowly approach 50%, which is
a picture for you.
Which is the objective. And the moment everyone's win rate is 50%, we won't know who is better anymore, and you'll foul the system, and it won't be able to matchmake at all anymore because everyone's identical. And that comment I've seen a lot, and I think that it is misunderstanding how MMR works. It's misunderstanding our current metric for who's better than someone else, which is how often you win, for a more nuanced and more meaningful metric, which is what contributions do you make that cause your team to win, which may be kind of like base XP average, maybe is something we don't even know about. But I don't think that it's the case that having everyone have a 50% win rate means that matchmaking would cease to work.
Yeah, so I want to agreed. Okay, I want to unwind 2 things if I can remember both of them. And then I also want to go back and grab a comment that Big Data made a while ago, which maybe we don't address a ton right now, but maybe we'll talk about it a little bit. So Big Data's comment was talking about Rocket League. And in Rocket League, the cars are less different than ships are in World of Warships.
Oh, yes, I want to talk about this.
So I want to say that out loud so that we pin that and we come back to it. We'll come back to that after we talk about a couple of things. Number one was this graphic. I keep pointing the wrong direction because this is a weird layout. But this graphic over here is kind of describing what you're talking about. As we match players by skill more and more accurately, players with higher win rates have to fight uber chads like they are. They have to only fight, the Jolly Green Giant and Paul Bunyan and Iron Man and all these dudes. So they start losing some of their win rate. It starts coming down because they're fighting people that can actually challenge them. They're picking on someone their own size.
And theoretically having very exciting matches doing so.
One would hope that the games are closer and that like when they win, it feels better. Now, we talked about feelings earlier, and we can't always predict feelings. That it feels like a triumph. It feels legendary because they're not just over there like, picking on kids and taking their lunch money. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we've got the players on the lower end. I've got mirrored hands here. And so those lower end players who are maybe new or they're learning or they're simply not as skilled as the Super Unicum Uber Chads. Those guys are fighting other people that are not Super Unicum Uber Chads. They're fighting, more new players. They're fighting players who have similar performance. And as a result, they don't have to fight somebody with a 68% win rate who's got 500 battles in the Fujin, right? And so their win rates come up. And that causes the blue line on this graphic over here to start to shift and look more like this green line. It doesn't mean
if I can put some illustrations on that. Yeah. So as a low skill player, it means you don't get dev struck from the other end of the map without even knowing the person was there as often. Because if you're struggling, probably the people around you are struggling. So less randomness appears to happen, and maybe you have a chance to live a little bit longer and learn a little bit. Could be good for growth.
That's a really interesting comment, that things that feel random to you but are skill for the other player would happen less. That's really interesting. Keep going.
Maybe. And certainly
it's
a certain amount of randomness is
anecdotal.
always in the game. Yeah. And then on the top end, right, in order to continue to win, the players with high skill are going to have to do more than just dunk on a bunch of low skill people, which feels good, individually, but it causes the games to lose value. So you're going to have to use the full breadth of armor, the full breadth of mobility. You're going to have to juke. You're going to have to use islands. You're going to have to use and those individual things all represent individual skills that compound on one another that are the reason you're above average in the first place. So as you fight other people who are also above average, your skills are tested and require development in order to continue to improve, if improvement is what you care about. And I think we should talk about if improvement is what you care about separately.
Okay, boy, we're gonna have to put a pin on that, scribble that down. Chat, don't let us forget. So I want to stay on this graph just a little bit longer. One of the things that you said is, I think, first of all, Elar just rated us. So, Elar Gorm, thank you so much for bringing your folks here. We'll take good care of them. Guys, if you're just joining us, welcome. I'm here. My name's Clyde. This is my stream. And we're talking about skill-based matchmaking and whether or not it's a good idea and some of the trickinesses about it. And I've got with me Mr. FoamingJetty. You can find him at twitch.tv/FoamingJetty. He's also a North American CC, just like Elar Gorm, as well as myself. And hopefully you'll enjoy the conversation today. So join us and we'll continue on. One of the things that you said, and I think you said it because it's a thing you've parroted from what you saw in Reddit posts and in forum posts, may it rest, and in your own stream, is people saying, well, then everybody has a 50% win rate. I would say that that's an oversimplification. I think then more people have a 50% win rate, but it's not everybody. It means that if you're going to be the crab that crawls out of the bucket, you got to beat up all them other crabs. You got to work harder to escape that 50% fate, right? And this works more than one way, right? If you also are a player who really wants to be terrible at World of Warships, or if you're a bot or something, and you want to crawl south into worse and worse ratings than 50%, you really have to earn that by being either incredibly bad or incredibly good. There's some interesting things that come out of this in terms of results, and I think some of them, I don't have any facts to prove these, but they're interesting things to theorize about.
Well, we actually have some examples. So to your point about how hard you have to crawl to go up or down, we do have some examples, but I see maybe you're not done thinking.
Well, let me throw out a couple of things out there. First of all, Angelic Cypher just said, what about Smurf accounts? ? And I said, yes, that's one place.
Pin on it.
Yep, pin on it. Hang on, I'm gonna actually get a card out and write down some words. We have 3 topics that we need to go back and unwind. One of them is Smurf accounts, and there are players who maybe only play WoWs who don't know about Smurf accounts. We want to talk about ship variability versus Rocket League cars. And I want to talk briefly, and I think there was something else that I've already forgotten.
If improvement is your objective, what's your objective of playing?
Is your goal. Okay, I've got those written down. And then the thing I want to hit real quick is some of the side effects of players getting forced towards the middle on this bell curve we've got over here. One side effect is it might be easier to identify players who are throwing matches, who are bots, things like that, right? Potentially. Because if they're really trying to throw matches, they're going to be further outside the bell curve. They'll be easier to identify. Yeah. Another thing that's and we don't even have to necessarily speak about that unless that really tickles your fancy. Another thing that's really interesting too is that players who are used to getting 3,000 average XP per game might not anymore, which means the economy will be adjusted for players, right?
An interesting thing, because I don't know what we can assume about it.
It's kind of hard.
I think that's true in the lobbies where at the end screen you see one person with 3,000 XP and a whole bunch of people with 500, where one person's gain was everyone else's loss. But there are also games where you see multiple people on both teams with 2,500 plus, just because that's how hard fought it was.
Yeah, and those games I think would probably be unchanged, right? But if you're looking at somebody who, as an individual, can carry 11 people on their back to the top of the victory mountain, that dude is not going to get the credit that they used to get. And what does that do to them? Is that something that a player is going to have a hard time with? Something
It's about
they're not going to
it's about
like
deciding
that adjustment.
what they want, right? So I know we
So
put a
maybe
pin
that's
in
the
this.
topic we go to next. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So we put a pin in this, but there are people, and I occasionally am one of them. I don't live there, but I like to visit, that check their ranks and judge their progress or their achievement based on how they compare to other players, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone plays games for a different reason. One of those reasons is, how good am I really? I throw up my stats and look at them now and then. I don't even think I realized that stats were available until I had several thousand games. Thank God.
Same.
That would have changed how I started interacting with the game.
Yep.
But if you are one of those people, you just change which metric you care about. Instead of caring about win rate, you care about whatever MMR gets chosen. And if you look at the other games that exist, nobody actually looks at win rate in isolation. They look at their MMR and they say, I'm an 1800 MMR player. I'm a 2100 MMR player. That ends up being the yardstick that people measure themselves against, if that is what interests you. And if improvement is what interests you, then repetition with a small number of variables, which leads us to our other pin about ship variety, but repetition with a small number of variables so you can actually learn it and practice mechanics is really important in a limited field with clear feedback. This is how we improve. Skill-based matchmaking, I think, provides both of those. And if you are unfamiliar with other games where skill-based matchmaking exists, I'd encourage you to just do some exploration, because win rate is not generally the only way that it's measured.
No, I think win rate is a number that everybody understands, and Wargaming has, or World of Warships has, right? And I think that makes it the de facto number that people like to compare. And we all know that, like, some clans, some more serious clans, they're like, well, I don't even care about your win rate, man. I only care about your solo win rate, right? And that's more accurate. It's can you win games by yourself? But I think shifting to another metric is probably something that would happen if we had an MMR rating, whether it was public or well, it would have to be public, I suppose. We'd shift to an MMR value and we'd look at that. And I think players could still look at that and be like, my MMR is better than your MMR number, or my MMR number is better than your MMR number, so I'm a better player than you. And you could still have people being sassy and spicy about that. Not that I think that's what MMR is trying to resolve. But it's just one of those deals where I think we see players using whatever metrics they have rather than the best metrics that could possibly exist.
And grasping for any metric is, again, it's confirmation that there is a hunger for this. People want to know how they match up. Maybe they don't find themselves that way. Maybe they're like me and they visit occasionally. There's a dark side to this too, and that is, if you are the kind of person who is motivated by achievement or by competition, then what do you give up in the name of more achievement? So do you only do meta established plays? Do you only go to the certain places on the map because they are the quote unquote internet certified best places to be? Do you only match the captain builds that are certified by the World of Warships Discord? And each certified, Clyde has caught this. Chad, if you haven't caught this yet, these are air quotes.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Certified, internet certified, forum approved.
Forum approved. But there is a real thing, and it's measured in many, many games where you have meta stagnation, where people are afraid to be experimental, and they're afraid to be creative, they're afraid to take risks, or they're afraid to try new classes because, and this is something that I always joke about in World of Warships, I am not a DD main. I am not a cruiser main. I like the variety that World of Warships offers, and I play all of my ships. If I am motivated by achievement, do I stop playing that variety because I have worse results in, let's say, daring than I do in, let's say, Hindenburg? Like, I don't, like, make up whatever combination of ships applies to you. That's a risk for people who value achievement more than they value in-game fun.
Yeah, that's for real too. And with as many boats as there are in this game, you can avoid entire ships or entire lines, and it's fine, right? It's perfectly fine. By the way, I wanted to thank Bad Jokes from Wargaming for following. How appropriate. I'm not going to say anything beyond that. I just think that's amazing. But Bad Jokes, thanks for the follow. We're glad to have you here. Jetty, CV, and Submain, says Scotta. Perfect. We heard it here first. Yeah, I mean, I think players do that, right? We talk about people who farm PR and how they won't farm PR on Borgonia because it's super hard to farm PR on Borgonia. So you have to go farm PR on, like, Leone, which is a ship that I surprisingly have a decent PR on. But it's because nobody plays it, because it's not a strong ship, because it doesn't lead to things. So do you avoid these boats because they hurt your stats? And I'll be honest with you guys, I like my stats.
If you were to join,
I'm a very medium player. I am not a great player of World Warships. I'm fine. I said this to Bogsy the other day. I said, I'm the guy on the matchmaking monitor that people scroll past because they're looking for purple guys and red guys, and I'm in the middle, right? Nobody even looks at me. Nobody gives two craps about where Clyde is on the board. But I still like my numbers, and the reason is that I like to see if I'm improving or not. And you talked about different ways that we could do that, whether it's through MMR or ELO rating or something else. There's other ways to measure improvement. It doesn't have to be these metrics that we have today. So you were going to say something. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, if we're going to take that to an extreme, how would it be to wake up and a month from now, skill-based matchmaking is released, and you join a match, and there are only 4 varieties of ships, because those are the internet approved 4 best varieties, and if you don't do those things, you are hurting your team. It's already the case that armchair admirals will tell you when you make a mistake, and they very often have no idea what they're talking about, but they'll speak with all kinds of authority.
Yeah.
If I play Rocket League, there are unspoken conventions in Rocket League. When 2 people face the ball and they're equidistant, the person on the left always has priority at kickoff. And if you don't know that, then you're a bad competitive Rocket League player for not knowing the unspoken rules of competitive Rocket League. There are those kinds of unspoken rules in all kinds of competitive games. Knowing them makes you more competitive. Not knowing them makes you less competitive. And I mean, is that a loss to World of Warships, where the current, I mean, I know SFNL is making jokes in chat at my expense,
but continue.
And I deserve each and every one of them. If I had my way in a perfect world, I wouldn't face carriers and subs as they currently exist. And this is a joke that people will say on my channel all the time. But I do value the variety of surface ships and the variety of experiences that they provide. And I would be sad if we lost the quote unquote not meta ones.
Yeah. And while we're talking about meta, I think a lot of people know meta stands for most efficient tactic available. At least I think so. Or if it doesn't, it didn't before, it does now. And so like when we talk about those meta ships, right, that's what we're talking about. They're the boats that get the job done better than others. And we see this in clan battles, because clan battles is probably the closest thing we have to a true competitive mode in World of Warships. And we know it's not perfect. They've been doing a lot of game making, a lot of crazy stuff with the matching or with the ships that are banned and legal. The most recent clan battle season was quite honestly insane with the number of rules. It was not unmanageable, but it was pretty ridiculous. It was probably the most complex season I think I've ever played, and I've played in all of them. So, but you know, we're trying to make that varietous. That's not a word, but have more variety and be a lot of fun, and they don't always get it done. I like SFNL's comment here. It says, sometimes bad ships are fun. I actually really like playing bad ships.
Yeah, I do too.
It's a huge challenge, and it's fun to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, and I was just going to say, the when people ask me what the best ship is, I always scold them in the finest Jetty fashion, which means they probably don't know that I'm doing it.
Sure.
And say it's not about which ship is better than the other ship. It's about which ship is best for you as a player, which ship matches your player impulses. And I think that's definitely true. And there's a risk of people feeling pressured in a skill-based matchmaking environment to lose out on those fun first principles. I'm a big fun first guy. was going to mention something else, but it eludes me. So I'll hand the mic
Okay.
back over to you.
I'll throw up a different chart real quick, and we can talk about this. We sort of skipped over this because we sort of assumed everybody was on an equal footing to us, having either watched my video or come to these conclusions on their own already. But this is a chart that shows. Let me make that a little bigger. This is a chart that shows the accuracy of account base XP at predicting the outcome of a battle.
Okay, so before we do this, I got to ask you to back up, Clyde, because there's so much of value that happens before this graph. I think you got to tell them how you collected the data, just briefly.
No, that's
fair. Tell them why blue line goes up is meaningful.
Yeah. Okay. Do I have other graphs? I don't have all my graphs here, but essentially what had happened was I went and collected some data. So I collected, it was I think 333 battles worth of data. I did it manually. I need to automate it. Okay, I will. But collected a bunch of battle data, and I looked at the 6 indicators that I listed earlier. Account and ship win rates, battle counts, and average base XPs. So there's 3 of those. There's average base XP and ship, win rate and ship, number of battles in ship, and then there's account, average base XP, win rate in account on my account, and then number of battles on my account.
And if you want to fully understand what we're about to talk about, please go watch that video. It's a very good explanation. It goes at a very good pace. You won't be left out. Pin it for later. Sorry, you weren't plugging your video hard enough, Clyde.
No, that's fair, and I appreciate it. That's very kind of you. It's not the kind of video that gets a lot of watch because it's not about video games, right? It's kind of about video games, but it's not about video games. So it's very data driven. And what we did was I basically measured all of these numbers for my teams, not for individuals, for teams. And I said, which one of these numbers can predict the winner of the game the best? And the reason I wanted to do that was I wanted to know if we could predict who's going to win a game with an unreasonable amount of accuracy, then that means that Matchmaker is unreasonably producing games that are imbalanced using data that literally everybody has, right? And it turned out that average account base XP was the best metric for that. Now, spoiler alert for me, I guess, was I already did this experiment back in like 2017, and I already knew that this was going to be the winner. But I'd thrown all that data away, and I didn't have it anymore. So I did the entire experiment again, and collected the data. I'm gonna grab the link to the video because Angelic Cypher is asking about it. Let me grab it real quick. You guys can save this for later. It's not short, but it's well bookmarked, so you can find your way around. So what this graph is showing us is across the bottom, we have the account XP gap. That's the gap between Team Green and Team Red. The bigger that gap is, yeah, you're very welcome, Cypher.
That's the bigger the average account XP.
That's right, team average account XP. So it's basically taking the number of players on the team, multiplying their base XP in their ship times the number of battles, dividing it by the total number of battles of all the players, and then giving us that number, right? There's a bunch of math in there, but at the end of the day, it's the average account XP of a team versus the average account XP of another team. I'm not doing as good a job explaining this here live as I did in the video because that was scripted. But if there's a gap of 51 or greater, then the team with more average account base XP would win 75% of the time. If it's 101 or greater, it's 77% of the time. If it's 151 or greater, it's 81.6% of the time. The battle we played when we started the stream had 162, I think, average XP. Actually, it's still up over here. It was 1041 versus 1202. So it was 159 average base XP. So it's in this 81.6% predictable category. And you can see it continue on and on. And basically, once we hit 300 or more, 301 or more, in the data set I had, there may be examples in the world where this is not the case. In the data set I had, none of those battles were lost by the team with more average base XP because it literally became untenable for the underdog to actually come back and respond and defeat that team. I think that net was like, I want to say it was like 30 or 40 battles in that upper section. So it wasn't a ton of battles, but it had 100%
But we're talking
accuracy.
10% of your data collection.
Yeah, 10% was known for sure before the game started, according
That's
to
an
these
uncomfortable
metrics.
frequency.
It is. Honestly, when I look at this and I see a gap of 51 produce a 75% accurate prediction, that's uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
50 is easy. 50 is like 180 of these games, I think. And the numbers of the games are in the video. So if you're curious about the specifics, go watch the video.
Half the games that you ever participate in, based on your sample,
based on my sample,
have a known victor in advance with 75% or better accuracy.
Yeah. And that's too much. That's not good enough, right? People, we had a person earlier dropping some comments in here that got deleted who was saying, like, people never say mean things about wargaming. Your matchmaker is too predictable.
Now, I want to make a clear break here.
Yeah.
We're talking about a problem right now. We're no longer talking about the solution. We've spent a lot of time talking about skill-based matchmaking systems that are inside of the game, matchmaking systems that are in other games like Rocket League. We put a couple of pins in to talk about later. But we're no longer talking about the solution. Right now, we're talking solely about the problem. The problem is that there's a large chunk of games you participate in where your chance to win is not equivalent. Whether you choose to look at it or not is up to you. I choose not to look at it. Clyde has chosen to look at 333 of them.
Which is not a huge data set, right? SFNL just said, I have thousands of games in a SQL database. Map spawned by side, ironically, is an independent variable, and by game. Absolutely it is. Yeah, north and south. A lot of the games are mirrored, but not all of them are perfect, right? A lot of the maps are mirrored, that is. And so there's a lot of factors that I did not take into account. You can do so much, especially if you have access to the data that World of Warships has. You could do some incredible things with this.
We should throw out there that probably someone at Wargaming has, or they have the capability to. So
absolutely, those guys are thinking about this,
Yeah, the metrics that we have available to us, this is the best one you found of those that are published. Doesn't mean that it's the best one that exists.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I took a sledgehammer version of looking at this and said, okay, we just got these 6 numbers, let's do, very caveman. It was basic. And even though it was basic and glossed over a lot of things, it's this accurate at predicting the outcome of the game. And I want to talk about real quick why account base XP, why I haven't proven this. Why do I think account base XP is the best predictor? And the reason is that account base XP is made up of lots of things. It's made up of kills and caps and defends and damage and lots of torpedo hits and gun hits. And, you get points for all this stuff. Wargaming doesn't tell us what the algorithm is, and they shouldn't, but they not tell us what the algorithm is, but all of those are many variables that bubble up to be your average account base XP. And that's one of the reasons why it's a better indicator than battle count, which is obviously a very stupid indicator. SFNL says, you are both assuming matchmaking is optimized for even teams. I'm not quite sure I understand that question, SFNL.
I'm not trying to make a statement for or against that yet.
Against what SFNL is talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll hold on to that, I guess, if we want to come back and talk to it a little bit more.
I think the suspicion that I have is that Wargaming is not making any provision for the evenness of teams. Only a provision for the ships that are allowed to participate. No provision at all for the evenness of teams.
Well, and I think part of what SFNL is saying is that we're assuming that Wargaming might be interested in even battles. And they might be, but they also might be interested in selling ships or something, right? And that's fair. That's part of the business, right?
And while we're
it's a little tinfoil hat here. I mean, we don't have to spend a lot of time there unless we want to. But yeah, go ahead. What else you got?
I was just gonna say, while we're at it, it's worth noting that there are games out there that have instituted skill-based matchmakers, have had backlash from their communities saying, this is too stale, this is too meta, this is not creative enough, this is not casual enough, this is not fun enough. Please remove or loosen skill-based matchmaking. And skill-based matchmaking is not an on-off, it's not a binary thing. You can loosen and tighten the skill cohorts that are allowed to match with each other. Some game companies have responded by loosening matchmaking. Some really popular games like Counter-Strike don't have a skill-based matchmaker. They are quite clear about the fact that everyone should fight everyone at all times. That's a part of the identity of their game. I don't think I've ever heard Wargaming come out and say this is the identity of their game. I've heard
No.
silence on the issue of player skill, and a lot of volume on the issue of ships involved.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily the case that it is preferred for every team to have evenness on every game.
Yeah, I don't know that that's necessarily a requirement or anything. And again, like you said, we're talking about the problem. And the problem is that with my blunt instrument sledgehammer, I can predict games this accurately. Which is too accurate. That's what I believe this tells me, and there may be other interpretations. What I believe this tells me is that matchmaking doesn't make games that are close very often, is what I think it means, right? And maybe that's a pretty general statement. That might be a little dangerous, but with the idea that the matchmaker often makes games which are too predictable. And in my opinion as a player, I want them to be less predictable. Go ahead.
Yeah, and to your point about where we started this conversation, the problem that I have is that I want my time to have value, and I perceive my value to be increased by interesting experiences for the 10 minutes that I'm inside the game. I want to have those 10 minutes be meaningful. Is the meaningfulness of my time reduced when I know with an 80% chance that my team is going to win or lose in advance? I feel like that reduces the value of my participation. Now, to fully express this, if I let it change my behavior, then I am then I'm going to create my own adventure, right? It's like in Star Trek when you go back in time and you're like, oh no, if I change anything with my foreknowledge, it will change the outcome. If you change the way you play a game because you have an 80% chance of winning, you're like, ho, I can go to the middle. Well, you've just changed your 80% chance of winning based on your expectations. You should always play every game to the fullest.
Yeah.
But I already do that. And I see too many cases of runaways, too many cases of games that feel like they're over in the first 3 minutes. And you have some graphs about runaway games that are really interesting here.
I do. I don't have them ready, but we could grab one if there's one or two in particular that you're interested in. But let me see if I have them close by. But I do have... one of the things that I talk about a lot on my stream is when I'm losing a game. When I'm losing a game, I'll say, okay, guys, we're down 3 ships right now. And usually, people on your team are like, well, this game's over or whatever. And, because people have decided that this one's going to be too hard to win. And I go, well, and a lot of times what I'll talk about is how, well, the enemy team's going to be overconfident now. And they're going to step out here and do stupid things because they think they can't possibly lose. And they probably can't. But I'm going to keep fighting as though they can because they're not. They think they can win. And if they think they can win and they step up, and you and I just about flipped that last game in a freaking Leone and a Mahan, by the way.
Well, the funny thing is, I threw something like 8 sets of torps at a single cruiser that was chasing me, and he just happened to thread all 8 sets. If he had died a minute earlier, I would have been in the cap. We could very easily have changed the outcome. It was really lucky that they were able to suppress us for as long as they did.
Yeah, that's for sure. And having hydros on the Pensacola, things like that. I don't know if they used them or not, but they probably did if they dodged that many, right? They were doing the things that were getting them what they needed. So the runaway matches, those steamrolls is I think the term I used to call them. I called them in the video is an issue, and I thought the data wasn't as bad as I thought, but I didn't have the world's best way of measuring whether or not steamrolls have, and I fully copped to this in the video. You've seen it, and I go, listen, this is pretty crude, but we'll do our best to talk about steamrolls and how we think they happen or don't happen. By the way, Kevasib, thank you for the raid. Welcome on in, folks. We're talking about matchmaking. keep it classy here, but we are talking about pretty much everything. So you can throw questions in chat. We'll try to talk about them, and we're just jaw-jacking. This is pretty chaotic video, but we're having a good time, or pretty chaotic stream. We're having a good time talking about it. I'm Clyde. If you've never been here before, welcome to the channel. You can hang out here. If you enjoyed the conversation today, hit the follow button, come back and see us again later. If you also like this conversation, you should also click on FoamingJetty's name. It's right there in the stream title, so you can just click on his name and hit follow there if you're not already a follower on his channel, as he's my counterpart in today's discussion. But yeah, Steamrolls are a thing where they can get away from us. And looking at some of the data, Steamrolls weren't quite as bad as I thought they were going to be. And I'm going to try to pull up some pictures here, but can you vamp for a while I'm doing that?
Yeah, so there's a risk of me misattributing, right? But Malarkey says, what do you qualify as a steamroll, just so I understand better? And I think you did a good job expressing this in your video. Again, if you haven't watched the video, it's worth your time to have a look. Something like where the game ends and the winning team has 7 or more ships more than the losing team at the end. Like not only that there's a win, but that the discrepancy in surviving ships is outrageous.
Yes.
Now, as a player, you probably experience this slightly differently. You might experience a steamroll as many ships dying so soon that the surviving ships have no chance. You might find this as the winning team has such a tight control over positions on the map that they control all the caps, and it's a stalemate where no one can make progress, right? And like, there are a lot of ways that we experience things that feel like steamrolls, but you actually defined what a steamroll is for the purposes of this.
I did, and again, I completely cop to the idea that this is not the world's perfect definition of a steamroll. It's one way of thinking about what a steamroll is. And what you described is correct, or at least it's what I said, which was, I said, well, if the winning team has 7 more ships than the losing team. That doesn't mean if the winning team has 7 ships. It means if the winning team has 7 ships and the enemy team has 0 ships, or if the winning team has 9 ships and the losing team has 2 ships, right? You can't just have 7 ships. Now, again, that's crude. It ignores all kinds of details. A statistician would slap me for it. However, it let me look at the data that we had in a relatively simple way and say, okay, so how often is it like super bad, right? And so looking at this chart, this right here is a gap in ship count between the winners and the losers. You can see there are negative numbers on the x-axis there. Negative numbers means that the winning team had fewer ships than the losing team, right? They won despite a ship disadvantage. And we never saw, at least in my 333 battles, again, more data is more better. In my 333 battles, we never saw a battle where we got completely smoked. As soon as I stopped collecting data for this and started working on the video, I had a match where my team won. We had 12 ships and the enemy team had none at the end. I think we killed them all. It was a 12-0, like just smoked the enemy team. So it can happen. It's not unheard of. Everybody's heard a story at some point in their life about it. But what's interesting about this is the most common result is that the winning team has 6 ships and the losing team has 0, right? Or at least a 6-ship, I shouldn't say that, a 6-ship gap. It could be 8 ships over 2 ships or whatever.
And as Malarkey says, there are different ways. We could express this in different ways, and if we wanted to really explore blowouts or runaway games, whatever you want to call them, you would want to express them in a couple of ways just to see how the data fits. But you have to define your data in order to make any sort of measurements. This is a good definition, but how does this relate to the team average base XP metric?
I don't know that I related the two together.
I thought you did.
I don't think I did. I think you could. I did grab a couple of more. I have this chart as well. Let me grab this one. Come on. Ooh, it's huge. It's very, very large. This one was just talking about. This is probably not where you wanted to go necessarily, but it's where we have arrived. So we can certainly steer off of this afterwards. But what's interesting about this chart is winning team versus losing team. This is just the number of surviving ships. Did the winning team have 1 to 3 ships, 4 to 6 ships, 7 to 9 ships, or 10 to 11, or 10 to 12? And what we're seeing here is that the bottom half of this chart is heavier. The 1 to 3 ship bar is bigger than the 10 to 12 ship bar. The 4 to 6 ship bar is bigger than the 7 to 9 ship bar. And obviously, if you add the bottom half and top half together, it's closer to 1 to 6 ships than it is to 7 to 12 ships, right? I think balancing this is probably tricky, the Steamrolls thing. And by the way, Malarkey, I loved your comment earlier about match time. You know, how many games were over in less than 5 minutes, right? People would care about that one for sure. I don't have that data in this set, but it's definitely something that I think would be really interesting to look at again, and if we do another data collection. But looking at this, though, I mean, we can see Steamrolls could be worse, but they're still pretty heavily weighted, you know, as we had the other chart in here, for the enemy team or the winning team to have 6 more ships than the losing team, which feels like a lot to me, but I honestly can't prove it. I don't actually know that's true.
So to wrap this idea back up,
yeah, go ahead.
We have one possible way of measuring what a steamroll is.
Just one.
And that just one. And we speculate that team average base XP might be used to predict steamrolls, but that's not something you actually measured, just to be clear.
No, I did not tie those together. I think that one could with the data that I've got. I think that's possible. And you could say, okay, which games were steamrolls by this definition? And then you could go back to this chart right here and say, was it even worse? Right?
Yeah.
Like, was it even worse in steamrolls? And I bet you the answer is yes, but I haven't done the math to prove it. And I think that would be really interesting.
This is what we would say in a math classroom. This is an exercise left to the reader.
Yes, that's exactly right. We have left it to the reader, and you can certainly do that if you want, but we're moving on to polynomial functions or whatever comes next after this. I don't know. But yeah,
you can do this yourself, guys. Like what Clyde has done here is a lot of effort and it's a lot of dedication, but there's nothing that prevents you from gathering data and exploring problems.
Yeah. And one of the critical things to do is to divorce yourself from opinions and things. Like, I'm not going to give anybody advice on being a data scientist. I'm not a trained data scientist. Some of you guys might be, right? And that's incredible. Welcome to the channel. Please don't make me feel small. But, you know, I'm not a trained data scientist. I'm okay with basic math, and I feel like I do a decent job of divorcing myself from my feelings and my opinions on this kind of stuff, so that we can look at stuff and try to take away something valuable or useful from it. I wanted to throw this chart up there too, which just talks about the number of upsets, which is when the winning team had fewer than the number of ships that the losing team had, the number of steamrolls, and the number of normal matches. Again, using my fairly, you know, basic steamroll definition. About 24% of battles, a little more, were steamrolls, right? Yeah, okay, maybe the definition's a little thin there to talk about that, but 24% of battles had 7 more ships on the winning team than the losing team, which again, does that feel like too many or not enough? I don't know. And I think this message comes out in the video as well, where I talk and I go, you know what, this is just steamroll data, and I don't give you like an interpreted answer where I go, and this is what it means. I just say, here's some stuff to think about. Let's move on, because I'm not sure that I've done a good enough data analysis to really talk about steamrolls.
And we could go there, and we don't need to go there to get back to the basic point. And the basic point is, if we want our, so this is one of the ways that a player might feel like their time is devalued, right? In fact, not just the emotion of being devalued, but if I mount let's say green boosters or blue boosters or God forbid red boosters in a random battle, and it's over in 3 minutes and I've not had a chance to participate, I'm actually potentially losing doubloons, which is real money, in a game that I did not have a chance to participate in through no fault of my own. Like, those games happen and they're super frustrating, but that's not the point. The point in a broader sense is, if the problem is wanting to feel like my time has value, and if the problem is wanting to maximize the fun I have in a game, give me games that don't have predetermined winners and losers.
Yeah. And
give me confidence that my participation has value.
Yeah. And so I went back to kind of I keep going the wrong direction. I went back to our kind of like, here's a bunch of things we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
We've talked about, like, I think you just summarized kind of player complaints, or at least your complaint, which is, hey, I want to make sure my time has value. I think a lot of players maybe haven't mathed this or thought that all the way out to that extent, but I think that's a big complaint that players have. I think that skill-based matchmaking, one of the things you mentioned in your comment on YouTube, this is something I wanted to make sure we talked about, is that players think skill-based matchmaking would be terrible. And we've touched on this a little bit. Some players like, we shouldn't do that because it'll ruin it. It'll give everyone a 50% win rate. But I think we've kind of hypothesized that that isn't the case. I guess, what would you say to somebody who says that?
So we talked about.
Is there like a short message that explains kind of your stance there, maybe?
I think we've touched on that a couple of times, so we can summarize that.
Yeah.
First of all, it probably would push win rates closer to 50%. It wouldn't peg everyone at 50%. Even in the wide world of chess, where there are God knows how many thousands of professional chess players who have a known ELO, right? They don't all have 50% win rates, but it does put them in matches with opponents that are better suited to their skill to make for more interesting competitions. And instead of tracking win rate, the other part of this is, if all win rates are 50%, then then everyone's equal and it means nothing. Well, no, it just means stop tracking win rate and track MMR, ELO, whatever the case may be instead.
Yeah. And
we're not claiming to have the best metric, but that should not be a reason to
not try to improve this,
Yeah, that should not be a reason
fix this problem.
Reject skill-based matchmaking. I can think of a couple of reasons to reject skill-based matchmaking. A couple of really good reasons. That's not one of them.
Why don't you throw those at me? Unless you've got a little more on that topic, because I think that's really interesting too. Why would we not want that as a group of players who play a game?
Yeah, we've talked about, chat's talked about this. SBMM's mentioned a couple of times. A couple of people mentioned it. We've talked about it briefly. The primary one that I think Wargaming talks about all the time is queue times. The most important thing for a business like Wargaming is that when somebody signs up to play a battle, they are serviced as quickly as possible. And obviously, there's an acceptable amount of time, and Wargaming is the only one who knows how much that acceptable time is. Yeah. But we already know that when somebody waits in queue for too long, we get what's called a dump queue, where a non-ideal fleet matches against a non-ideal fleet. The rules are relaxed. You can have double CV where there are only 6 total players. You can have a single CV fight another single CV. You can have a super ship with 5 tier 9s. Like, you can have all cruisers on one side and a battleship, 5 cruisers and a destroyer on the other. Like, these are clearly unbalanced team compositions, which is the thing that they care about.
You're gonna love this. I played, and everyone has one of these stories. This one just happens to be my favorite. Yeah. I played in a tier 11 battle where I was in a super CV, and there was 1 super CV, 1 battleship, and 1 cruiser on each team. 3v3 with a super carrier. I never ran out of planes. I could just send people across. It was amazing.
And in that one match that was completely not balanced for player skill, whichever super CV had a strong advantage determined the experience for all 6 players.
And it was the other guy. Let me tell you, we lost so hard. However, my experience was like just trying to farm damage as fast as I could before they killed my Kurfürst. I had a guy in the Kurfürst who was just getting absolutely raked over the coals, just absolutely destroyed by a dude, and I don't remember what he had, if it was the Eagle or what, but yeah, we lost because the other super CV was better than me,
So in this case, I should say Wargaming. Wargaming is actually practicing what they preach. They say that queue time is the most valuable characteristic, and if you look at their actions, they clearly believe that, because they make dump queues which violate the normal rules of matchmaking in order to prevent people from waiting too long. That's a business decision, and I can understand why a business would care.
And when we say business decision, that doesn't mean like this is because of dollars directly. It's probably about dollars indirectly, but it's also about our player experience, right? They don't want us sitting in queue forever because we'll quit, because that's not fun. And then as a result of that, dollars, right? I mean, we get to dollars eventually for sure, but it's also about just making sure that we get to play World of Warships quickly. Like, that's not an unreasonable thing. We want that too.
And if you ask me, am I willing to wait longer for a match? I know we talked about this before. I would absolutely wait a couple of minutes for a skill-based, balanced match. I personally would say yes. What's funny about that is 2 things. One, I'm not an average player, not even close to an average player. And two, and by this, I'm not saying that I'm super good, guys. I'm saying that I'm weird.
Yeah,
Let's be clear about what I am.
You're a committed, long-time World of Warships player with a lot of games. You're already in. They've hooked you. You play this game, and at least for the foreseeable, you're not planning on quitting entirely.
Yeah.
Right.
And the other interesting part about that
is that is distinct about you and about me and about most of the people in chat probably.
In addition to being not representing the average World of Warships player, I also may not actually know what I want. We have this lovely tendency to say what we think we want, and for the reality of what our actions say to be different. So it's possible, and I'm not saying this has happened, but it's possible for a big company to do research on what people do if they wait for 3 minutes in battle. And if 30% of them quit, then whether or not they say they will is not as important as whether they actually do.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what we mean when we say business.
Yeah, it's a decision that's about, and you know, the phrase that I think I hear Wargaming use a lot is the health of the game. That's not good for the health of the game, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's true, right? I believe what they say there because I think they know how that stuff works better than anybody in this channel does. Like, let's be real.
And it's important to recognize how small World of Warships is compared to other large PvP games. We're talking multiple orders of magnitude between World of Warships and something like League of Legends or StarCraft or Rocket League or Counter-Strike. Like put these side by side, and obviously Wargaming won't publish their concurrent player numbers because it's not in their business interests to be fully transparent about that. By the way, that's not a Wargaming thing, that's a video game thing.
That's an industry thing, I'm fairly sure.
But they're orders of magnitude apart. And as a result, Wargaming has to provide fast queue times and as much balance as they can reasonably provide without violating fast queue times on a much smaller sample of players at any given time.
Yeah, and to speak about that orders of magnitude thing, right? King of the Sea is the biggest tournament that World of Warships has. And I know tournaments don't speak to the popularity of the game, but if that's the Super Bowl of World of Warships, then King of the Sea is our biggest event, right? And when you go watch King of the Sea on the official World of Warships channel on the last weekend, they have something like 8 to 10 or maybe 11,000 people watching. That feels like a really big Twitch stream. I've got 93 folks here thanks to some friendly raids. Welcome everyone. We're glad you're here. By the way, Anonymous Gifter, I thanked you in chat, but I want to thank you verbally as well. The Anonymous Gifter, who has stopped by a couple of times lately, thank you Anonymous, has gifted 5 community gift subs. Thank you very much. That is incredibly generous of you. Completely unnecessary, but very, very, very appreciated. So thank you, Anonymous Gifter. But when we talk about something like the League Championship Series, or LCS, which is the League of Legends tournament, first of all, it's in a stadium. The stadium holds thousands of people. More people than watch COTS globally are in the stadium in person to watch some nerds play League of Legends on a stage wearing cool jackets that match, right? On top of that, tens of thousands, I want to say hundreds of thousands, but I'm not sure, but at least tens of thousands of people are watching around the world. It's like one of the biggest video game events that exists, right? So when we talk about the scale of this game versus the scale of a game that leaned in on the competitive thing and made that what their business is, it's not even close. And what's interesting here is World of Warships is not making this their business. They're not going to make money by selling out a stadium of people to watch clan battles. That's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to sell pixel boats and premium time to us, right? And I have no problem with that business model. It's just that it's not trying to be League of Legends. It's not trying to be Rocket League. It's not trying to be these other games or anything.
And we should talk about what it's trying to be. But before we leave this scale, this orders of magnitude scale, if you want to have a skill-based matchmaker, then you have to have the available pool of cohorts to match teams into. So suppose World of Warships had a skill-based matchmaker and it had some sort of MMR that matched 1,000 to 1,400 MMR players against other 1,000 to 1,400 MMR players. Like, let's just imagine that it had bins like that, because we already know that there is a bin system that exists in the current matchmaker. that bin system is all about ship types, and then it's further refined by last minute balancing. What if there were bins for player cohorts as well? Consider the multiplied effect of having to fill in all of the bins for ship compositions at the same time as all of the bins for player skills. That's not adding bins, that's multiplying bins, right?
Yeah.
So where you used to have 3 or 4 kinds of matches filling up at any given time, now you are talking 20 matches trying to fill up at any given time. So the number of players concurrently playing, the number of games trying to find matches is really, really relevant to whether or not you can have a skill-based matchmaker mode at all. And if you look at what we have described previously as a blunt skill-based matchmaker, which is ranked, very, very blunt, or clan battles, which I think is a little bit less blunt, but it's still kind of blunt. Both of those only have slots on dedicated days at dedicated times in order to force people who are interested into high concentrations so that for the briefest moment, we can have a blunt expression of skill. And I think that if we could do better than that, it would require more concurrent players, and this is not a game big enough to justify.
Yeah, for sure. While you were chatting there, I went and I got the numbers. So League of Legends 2022 Championship Series peaked at 5.1 million concurrent viewers. Right. So it's just like you said, the number of players is just not there for them to do something super, super interesting with skill-based matchmaking in the way that other games do. And League has MMR. It's in there. You've got a thing that's like matchmaking monitor that pulls up your players on your team and the players on the enemy team. And I played League for a couple of years. I had some friends who were really good at it. I was not. I was okay. And so like I would play with them and it matches your team. And so it would pull me up and I'd be fighting against guys way better than me because of the way matchmaking worked. It was way more fun when I played by myself than playing with my friends. And that's a different problem for sure. But your comment about forcing players to play clan battles at certain times is all about that density. It's all about making sure that there's lots of teams to choose from at any given moment. Because they are doing sort of a macro point system. You gain points and lose points when you're doing the clan battles matching, and that goes up and down. One of the things I found really interesting as I was looking at my own clan's matches over the last clan battle season, and it was very rare that we actually played a team more than once during a season. Now we play about 100 games a season. We only play one night a week for the full 4 hours, and then we usually miss a week or two. But yeah, go ahead.
I told this story, but Forte, the clan that I run, Forte is a real life first. It's for fun clan. We're not competitive. Right. We usually get to Storm reliably, and then occasionally we nibble up to almost Typhoon, and then we've rarely actually get there. Anyway, for a Storm clan, early in the last season, we were in the struggle for Gale very early in the season.
Yeah.
And we were in the queue for I think something like 30 seconds before clan battles dump queued 3x on us. And not just any 3x, but it was specifically the world champion COTS players on 3x against Forte struggling for Gale. We lost. It was funny and it was a learning experience. We talked about it. It was the kind of match that should never have happened. And of course, we reached out to some of the 3x folks afterward, and they had been sitting in queue for a long, long time. It was a dump queue for them. When you get up to the top ranks of clan battles, despite the compression to push people together into the same times for density, despite that, people at the top end of clan battles wait a very long time. Like we're talking, they play other games while waiting for clan battles to match them, because that is the closest to skill-based matchmaking that World of Warships actually has.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And those guys wait in queue for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Like literally, I've spoken with players who play in those clans, and they talk about 20-minute waits, and it's real.
Yeah, and they'd waited for 20 minutes, and then they got Forte, and
yeah. I will tell you, I'm looking at our last season. Last season, we played KSC, and we played Bonks, and we played. Looks like those might have been the two like teams that you've probably heard of that we played. We played a bunch of other clans too, but we played KSC on week 1 for literally no reason. Like that doesn't make any. Those guys have maps named after them. Their name's in the corner, right? I don't think I got to play NACL this season, but we have played them before. And so that'll happen. Exactly what you just described. Those guys are waiting for a Q dump, and we hit battle at the wrong time, and they throw us in there. I've played Bogsy's clan in clan battles in the past as well. I can't remember what his old clan was called, but we've bumped into those folks in chat, but also in clans. And it's a thing that does occur. It is TNG. I remember I dropped into TNG and Boxer goes, "Hey, Clyde," and I was like, I wish I could say I was happy to see you. Because we're like your clan. We usually get into Storm 3. I think our best finish ever was Storm 2. Right? We're a very average clan. We get to gold. That's where we play, and that's just kind of how that goes, right? And so, yeah, it can be tricky, but because of the limited number of players that are in any of these modes, we're going to have a hard time with skill-based matchmaking. So, okay, so we talked a little bit about some of the problems of skill-based matchmaking. We talked a little bit about the problems with the matchmaker as it exists today. Or go ahead if you got another thought.
Well, we only talked about one problem, and I think it's the main problem that Wargaming brings up, and I think we did a good job, and that's the time to match, which is related to the number of players available. Yeah. Well, the other one we've brushed on, and I don't know if we want to just highlight it, and that is, what kind of game do you want World of Warships to be? If you want World of Warships to be a casual game that you hop in for random explosions against a wide range of opponents at any given time, where some of them will dunk you and some of them you'll dunk, where there's not a hugely enforced meta of ship choice, not a hugely enforced meta of map behavior, not a hugely enforced meta of arms or armament, where you can bring in a division for lols and just go have lols. What you're looking for is a casual experience.
We call that clicky boats. If you want to just log in and play clicky boats.
And there are a lot of people who want clicky boats. Yeah. Those people would have a less fun time in a skill-based matchmaking mode. And for those games that are big enough to support both a casual and a ranked mode, Rocket League does it, a whole bunch, like StarCraft does it, a whole bunch of games will do this, where they have casuals and then they have ranked. Yeah. Now you are required to have a population big enough to service multiple queues of those obligations.
Which we're already struggling to do, certainly for certain game modes.
Exactly.
With World of Warships, yeah.
So if the primary objective of World of Warships is to have a casual experience where interesting fleet compositions fight each other with no provision for player skill, then you might argue that it is working as intended.
Yeah. Frost Knight says, raise his hand, I like clicky boats for randoms. I think everybody likes clicky boats, and I think that randoms being what they are today, ships of varying performance levels and capabilities, players of varying performance levels and capabilities, maps that are probably sort of balanced, but maybe not perfectly balanced, all of that stuff, that leads to some of the greatest stories you have ever told about World of Warships. You'll still have great stories, even in a skill-based matchmaking system, but you could totally scrub out some of the funnest games you've ever had. How many times have you run ships up the middle of two brothers and had it work out and it was awesome? Which you would never do if you were really worried about your MMR or your ELO rating or any of that stuff, right? Pretty crazy. Pac says, stupid question, why not make ranked skill-based matchmaking? I mean,
I was going to highlight that question too.
Yeah. Do you got a thought on it?
Well, I think they should. Like, personally, I would like ranked better if it was with a skill-based matchmaker. And you could make an argument that it's a defined separate mode, and maybe the reason they haven't done it is because they don't have the player density required. Even having compressed the play times for ranked down to a small window, maybe there's just not enough players there. Maybe they don't want to, but in a mode called ranked, I wish it was a skill-based matchmaker, personally.
Yeah, I do too, or at least something that did a slightly more intentional job about balancing the games on skill. It doesn't even have to be a skill-based matchmaker, and we'll talk about my crazy suggestion here in a bit. Hey, Eskance. And by the way, Eskance got here, and if I say a couple of nice things about Wargaming right now, it's not because of Eskance here. You guys know my general take on being fair to both sides of the problem. But Eskance, we're glad you're here. You are like 2 hours late, probably.
You are.
I will push this up to YouTube. You can certainly watch the VOD, or the VOD as well. It's been pretty chaotic. We're all over the place in terms of conversation, but I think it's been fun. So
yeah, and I think we're in a good place. Like, so we've talked about what we want, what we feel like the problem is, why we think we can measure the problem, and we've also talked about why skill-based matchmaker might not be a good solution. And what I love about your actual suggestion is that it's explicitly not skill-based matchmaker.
It absolutely is not that. And in fact, I want to hit one more thing. So why is this hard for wargaming? One of the things I talk about in the video, and I feel like this is true. No one at Wargaming said this was true. Nobody ever told me this. This is total Clyde speculation. And in the video, I do some ramp up to this where I kind of explain that, like, I work in software development. Jetty, you work in software development, and so I don't know what your development experience is and the kinds of places you've worked. You do not have to dox yourself. I'm not asking you to. I'm not going to talk about specifics about where I work either, but some of the things that happen when you're working in a piece of software, especially one that has a lot of change over time because it's in constant maintenance and development, is that some parts of the code are challenging. One of the things I want to propose to you guys as gamers and as viewers of this stream and as people who play World of Warships is that the matchmaking algorithm is, and I hit this point very hard in the video as well, is one of the most important algorithms in the game, if not the most important algorithm in the game, because it takes you from the port to a battle. If there's an audio bug, if there's a graphical glitch, if there's an aiming bug, if there's something minor about the color of this panel on this ship or whatever, none of that stuff matters as much as getting you from port to battle. It's super, super critical. They have changed the matchmaker a lot. I put this card up over here in the video as well, and it talks about just some of the ways that Wargaming has adjusted the matchmaker over the years. They've made a lot of improvements and changes, and they've made things better. Again, they've focused a lot on the ships, not on the players, not on performance metrics. But more on ship performance metrics or tiers or classes or what have you, more so than other player and team performance metrics. But they've not worked on it over the years. But one of the things that I think could make this challenging is that changing this the parts of the algorithm that they have never changed, is that they haven't changed them ever, probably, and at least not much since 2015. And that they've also split companies, right? Lesta is its own company, and Wargaming is their own company now. And when they did that, the devs split. Some of them came to Belgrade to live in Belgrade and to code for World of Warships. And some of them stayed in Russia, and they're working on Mir Korabli or whatever the other one's called. I'm sure I mispronounced that. I'm sorry to anybody who speaks Russian. Yeah. But and so the folks that wrote that algorithm might not even work for Wargaming. They might work for Lesta. And so if you don't have an expert and you just stood up a brand new development team and you ask them to go in there and change some of the oldest, crustiest code and make a big change that isn't just, hey, can you make this go from 3 carriers sometimes to never more than 2 carriers, please? That's like a setting that you can tweak. It's probably in a configuration file, honestly. I would be if I was the coder for this. But like to go in there and say, oh, hey, while you're doing matchmaking, can you query this database over here that we don't reach out to right now and get player performance data? Give me all the player cohorts, sort them around, find out which ones are better, find out if there's a performance mismatch between the teams, and then, change that by putting people and bucketizing them based on their cohorts and performance. Yeah, and if you can just do that,
and then change how big those cohorts are depending on how long they've waited, and also. Put a variable weight on whether there's 2 carriers or 1 carrier or whether the cohort's bigger. Like this becomes a can of worms.
You talked about the divisions, right? Which affects a player's performance because you got friends. Maybe they're on voice, maybe they're not. We don't know. And that becomes a can of worms. It gets very complicated. You have messed with code like this, I can tell. It's scary. It's really scary. And so, are they going to lean in on that with a brand new team? Probably not. Now again, maybe the matchmaking overlord, the wizard of matchmaking, was like, you know what, I'm going to move to Lest, or not move to Lest. I'm going to move to Belgrade and help with Wargaming with the programming. I don't know, maybe, but maybe not, right?
Well, and we can speculate on, you know, whether someone is capable of doing it or whether they have interest in doing it. Sometimes there are those areas where you're just like, you know what, it works, and we're not going to touch it unless there's a very good reason. And then you have to balance that with the more basic concerns we've already talked about, which is, what kind of game are you trying to make? If you're not trying to make that game, then there's not a very good reason.
Yeah, what's your motivation, right?
What's your player population? If you don't have enough player population, then you don't have a very good reason. So all of those speculations we make are fun. I love speculating about it.
Oh, it's one of
they
my
might also
things.
all be moot.
Yeah, they absolutely could be. And so Wargaming is going to do Wargaming things, and that's fine. I'm not hard over on this. I want matches to be more competitive, right? That's a dream that I have. And I put some charts together that say, hey, maybe they're not as competitive as they should be. Can we take a look at this? And I did send that to, I actually sent it to Ensconce as feedback. I said, hey, Ensconce, I know you guys like it when we have suggestions, and I know you guys send feedback. My feedback is coming to you this week in video form. And to Ensconce's credit, he watched the video. So thank you, Ensconce, for watching that. All right. It was long.
So we've beaten around the bush a little bit. I feel like we've talked about the problem, and just to clearly state, the problem is how it's easy to perceive that some matches have a preordained outcome, how your data collection suggests that it's very easy to predict the winning team in advance based on metrics we already have, which are probably not as good as metrics that Wargaming has. The fact that is easy for a casual observer to predict means that our player perceptions and our player emotions of either not having agency or not having impact or having our time wasted or not having as exciting a game as we want, like all of that might have some justification. What we haven't clearly said is what your suggestion is. We've said that it's not skill-based matchmaking, and to be clear, it doesn't divide people up into cohorts and make them only face people of their own tier. It doesn't require more people to be online at any given time. It doesn't require Wargaming to change their code to actually query the skill of a player. But what we haven't done is we haven't actually said what your suggestion is.
This is true. And I'm going to not say it for a little bit longer because Ensconce asked a really interesting question. He was asking about ranked. We talked about ranked a little bit earlier. He said, a question for you both on ranked. What would you expect ranked? And that was a beautiful wind up, by the way. I'm so proud of you. What would you expect ranked to be like if the irrevocable ranks, not leagues, were disabled and lessened? I guess I would imagine the fallout of that would be that players who are getting carried to the top would probably fall. They would be able to fall farther. And so there's a story. There are players who people know by screen name. I'm not going to name them. That everyone's like, oh, you bumped into this player. Cool. Yeah. That guy tries to get carried every season, or whatever. And so those kinds of players who try to get carried all the time, I like Ensconce's comment there. Those kinds of players who try to get carried all the time would be at risk of falling down if they were unable to be carried up and then stop-gapped at the irrevocable ranks. What Ensconce is talking about is sometimes you get to a certain level and then you can never fall lower than that, regardless of how many battles in a row you lose. And that's another thing that helps carry people to the top. I don't know if I think that's a full-scale solution for ranked. We talked earlier about how much ranked I played, which is not much because of ranked being kind of the way that it is, especially later on in the season. But I would imagine that would probably help, but I don't know that it would solve the ranked problem all by itself. I don't know. What do you think, Jetty?
I mean, I'd love to return and talk about ranked maybe at the end with a general question and answer.
You're doing a really good job of trying to keep me on task.
I'm really trying to get you to say what you're
proposing. All right, let's do it. We'll come back to that if we have time. I'm about to run out of voice because I'm getting sick. Okay, this picture.
I'm sorry, Ensconce. I mean, we talked about ranked already, and I'd love to talk about it again.
Yeah. We can do that in a bit. So here was my pitch and my proposal. So like you said, it's not based on matchmaking. So when I was looking at this graphic that I made that describes matchmaking, I'm just gonna make this turbo big, right? So we do the thing. Everybody gets into a division or not. You hit battle. You get put into your baskets. They try to sort your players around. They find a battle with you and 24 or 23 of your favorite friends. Matchmaker performs this final balancing step. And this is where they balance ships by tier, class, and nation. This is from Wargaming's video on matchmaking. It explains how it works. And they say, and then we do this final balancing step just to make sure, one team doesn't have all the same kind of capability and another team has all the other kind of capability. This is still based on ships, and ship performance has nothing to do with player performance. And then I said, well, what if that idea tells me that Wargaming has a piece in their code that goes, okay, now look at the game that we made, and if it's wonky, fix it. They have code that does that.
We mean specifically take someone on player A and someone on player B and swap them.
Yeah, somebody's on the red team from your perspective, and they should be on the green team because that would make a more balanced game, in this case because of ship capability. But they have a thing that looks at a match of 24 players and goes, hey, this could be better. I'm going to make a change within the realm of the 24 players I've already picked. Swip, 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 swap. And it can't always do it. If there's divisions that have, if you have 3 guys in Shimikazes, you can't push one of them to the other team because they're in a division, right, together. If you have 3 guys in a division in Shimikazes, you can't push that one guy over, so you're kind of stuck. Sometimes it doesn't work. But whenever it can, it tries, and it does its best. So I said, what if we make another one of those? We take that exact same concept. Wargaming goes, let's look at the game, and we'll go, hey, is this game wonky? How will we look at the game? Wargaming should use whatever the best data is they have for this. The way I would look at it, because I only have my 6 attributes that we looked at earlier, is I would say, let's take a look at the average base XP of each team, and using my magical math charts and stuff, I'd say, hey, there's a gap here that is too large. And that value, how too large it is, should be configurable, right? Maybe it's 150 XP, maybe it's 300 XP, maybe it's 85 XP, or maybe it changes dynamically based on past performance across my specific server, NA or EU or whatever. If we would basically look at that, we'd identify a battle that has too big of a team performance gap. We can make some swaps. We already have the technology. We already do it in final balancing, so we know they can do it. What I don't think they can do today is look at player performance inside the matchmaker. This is an old computer scientist's trick, which is that you only have the data that you absolutely need to do the job that you're doing right now. And so my guess is the matchmaker has no idea what the player performance data is inside the code that is the matchmaker. So that's one problem they'd have to overcome. They'd have to be able to have some value that represents the player's performance, and then they'd have to be able to compare those values for the teams, and then figure out, hey, if I move this guy who's got a 200 point better than average number and shove him across to the other side and bring this guy who's got a 80 points worse than average number over here, that brings the whole teams down to within a reasonable tolerance, within a reasonable spec, so that the game will be more competitive.
And as a result, you don't have the average team XP gaps that we know correlate with a chance of winning. Because by choosing 2 or 4 or however many pairs of players to strategically swap, you've prevented those gaps from occurring. It's almost certainly the case that there's a better metric than the one Clyde is suggesting.
Sure.
The metric, and it's definitely the case that whatever imaginary magic flying duck metric Wargaming chooses to use would be about player contribution instead of about win rate, because win rate is not appropriate for this task. Right. But the fact that this can be done with comparatively low data load is a point in its favor. The fact that it doesn't actually
When you say comparatively low data load, you mean it's not hard for them to do this check if they have player performance data in the matchmaker, because it's only 24 data elements. That's really tiny. That's what you're saying?
It's not hard to imagine them doing. Like I've worked in tech
yeah.
long enough that I'm not allowed to say what is hard or not hard.
That's
but
true.
It's not hard to imagine.
Well, hang on. Are you a manager or are you a developer? If you're a manager, you can say what's hard. You'll be wrong, but you can say it.
I have been told by my manager that I'm not allowed to say what's hard. I mean, I'm allowed to think it. I'm not allowed to say it out loud.
Well, that should be easy. I could do that in 5 minutes. Never say that if you're a coder.
Never say that.
Never say that.
So, but I mean, let's go over the things that the reasons why we wouldn't want a skill-based matchmaker and why they don't apply to this suggestion.
Sure. Yeah. Why don't you walk us through it? That'd be great.
So, reasons not to want a skill-based matchmaker. Number one, it requires a high pool of players, a higher pool of players than we currently have. This uses the existing pool of players and the existing selection mechanism for putting 24 players into a room, and then it shuffles those players once they're in the room. So it avoids that. Reason number two, it increases queue making times. Well, actually, the queue selects the 24 players using the exact same amount of time.
Nothing
and hopefully, hopefully if the data load required to identify a player with their magic flying duck metric is loaded at the, when they log into the server, then it's also a low additional time, right?
Yeah.
Reason number three, we don't want to change the tone of World of Warships. We don't want to limit people to players of their own skill level because that will make things crusty. That'll reinforce meta. That will prevent curiosity and experimentation. That will make it not clicky boats. That will take players of different skills and not expose them to each other. Well, congratulations. The player mix is still exactly the same.
It's the same 24 dudes or people.
Yeah, it just happens to be that you swapped two players so that everyone's time had more value.
That's exactly right. And so, there are problems with this, right? There are absolutely problems with this. It won't fix everything. And it keeps, what you just said there is it keeps some of the chaos, right? Like, we like that the games are a little crazy, right? I think players would be sad if that was gone. Now, that's a Clyde hunch. There's no facts about that. I don't have a chart that says, spreadsheet says you're having fun or spreadsheet says you won't have fun or whatever. But I think we like a little bit of crazy, and that's one of the reasons why you could adjust that. How far apart are the player performance, or the team performance metrics, basically, and you'd be able to find out what is the most fun, what delivers the most satisfaction. Now, would this make all players happy? No, come on, get out of here. There's no world in which that would make all players happy. And the other thing too about this is that, again, there are technical challenges, right? I suspect, again, we need to get more data available, or players would have to carry an integer around with their data profile or whatever that explains how they are in terms of performance and things, and recalculate that and then update it at the end of a battle. And, there's a bunch of stuff there. But I think some of that is going on already. The updating at the end of a battle, whenever stats are posted. I think some of that stuff's happening already. And this tries to avoid some of the pitfalls of what a skill-based matchmaker would bring to the game. Now, the other thing I talked about in the YouTube video about this is that there's no way that somebody hasn't already thought of this internal to Wargaming and proposed it, unless somebody said, literally, guys, stop making proposals. We're never going to change matchmaker because that's not what we want as a company, right? But obviously, if somebody was thinking about the problem of matchmaking, this is absolutely a thing that they would have talked about, and they already have a template that does the exact thing. It looks at the battle. It says, if I make this change, the battle is better. And so here's a new way of doing that brings team performance more into alignment. Obviously, it's not a unique or creative idea. I am not like a design wizard for coming up with this. And Wargaming has probably said it's either A, not priority enough, or B, doesn't meet our goals, business goals, development goals, what have you. And again, business goals, it's not about greedy profiteering, but it is about game health and community sustainment and things like that, right? So I guess that's the thing. That's the proposal, Jetty, is that right there, which is, hey, what if we didn't screw with the parts that ruin the timing, but we did make games less imbalanced? Yeah. And I don't think there's going to be a lot. I don't think me talking about this or making a video or doing data or chatting with you is going to make Wargaming go, you know what? You son of a bitch, I'm in. It'll be done on Friday. Like, they're not going to do it. And that's fine. It was important for me to talk about this and to
Well, I
put
think
my
it's a-
thoughts on paper to share them with like-minded nerds. Yeah, go
I think
ahead.
that's a great contribution to the community because you identified something that we have all talked about, which is our frustration with the perception of imbalance, the perception of some games being unwinnable from the start. We all
Yeah.
feel that way sometimes. And you said, all right, well, I feel that way. Let's see if we can measure the truth of that feeling. And you went out and you measured hundreds of games and you found a correlation that suggests that there is sometimes truth to the feeling. So if we feel bad about something,
Yeah.
what are the possible options for fixing it? We talked about skill-based matchmaker, which is, in my opinion, and I know I'm repeating myself, in my opinion, players in World of Warships and other communities, video game players in general, love to talk about solutions to problems without actually talking about the problem itself. What we're doing right now is we're talking about the problem of our feeling, and
Yeah.
we're not suggesting skill-based matchmaker. The term skill-based matchmaker is thrown around all over the place as the solution to all of our problems, and I think, as much as I wish we could have one, I don't think it's the right solution for World of Warships. And so instead of suggesting that, instead of saying every time you don't like something about World of Warships, it must be about, this is imbalanced. Oh, I don't like subs. Subs are imbalanced. Well, how about we talk about why we don't like something instead of prescribing the solution?
Yeah.
In this case,
that's step one for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something that I really appreciated about the way you approached this problem. And then we took procedural steps that we understand to the extent that we can understand something that Wargaming does, right? To the extent that
Right.
we can pierce that veil with their published documents. We said, here's how we understand what you do, and here's how something you already do could be done a little bit better, right? We're operating within a framework to the extent that we can understand it. Like,
Yeah.
this
I
to
mean, we
me
don't
was
have access to all the data. We can't understand it to the level they do.
Yeah.
But we can understand it to a level that was predictive enough that it became interesting to keep talking about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the bottom line is this was a really great contribution, and I'm so glad that we had a chance to talk about it and just talk about the fallacies I think that surround a conversation like this. Failing to describe the problem, failing to measure the problem, failing to consider the implications of solutions, failing to
Yeah.
consider the current implementation, failing to consider the trajectory of change. All of those things are reasonable, and I love how you talked about all of them.
Well, first of all, thank you. That's very, very kind of you. I tried to grab those very ideas, right, and talk about it. One of the best people I've ever worked with asked me an annoying question probably every day of my professional career, which was, and the question is this, and I find this to be a question that now I annoy others with. And the question is, how do you know? If you have a feeling, you said, hey, I don't like this, it makes me feel bad. First of all, feelings don't have a how do you know answer all the time. Sometimes you just feel bad, right? Then you go to that question. The next question is, why do I feel bad? Well, because the game's imbalanced, or because this ship's broken and overpowered, or because Wargaming's, a bunch of vampires that are, trying to steal my money or whatever. Okay, how do you know, right? How do you know that is true? How do you know it's imbalanced? How do you know?
How could you measure it?
How could you measure it? How can you prove
How do you
it?
define it?
Right. And I'm not saying prove it and pushing you, right? But I'm saying, how do you know? Because if you can tell me how you know, it does two things. It clarifies what you mean, because sometimes people go, this game sucks, and I can't, because it's imbalanced, right? This game sucks because it's imbalanced, right? Okay. If I ask you to define how you know it's imbalanced, and you go do a bunch of math and you come back and you go, see, these ships get more damage than those ships, so they're obviously imbalanced, then I know that you're talking not about balance, but about damage output of specific ships, right? Because that's actually what you meant, was I can't get as much damage as that guy, or that girl, or that ship, or that player, or whatever. The second thing it does is it actually provides some actual evidence. And if you can describe a problem and that problem really exists, and then the next thing is, and I always talk about this with my people, I go, hey, I would love it if you guys bring us feedback or things you want us to work on. Let me know. Describe the problem as best as you can. Tell me how you know it exists, and describe to me its undeniable impact. This is the third thing I ask for people, right? Write up your problem really good. Tell me how you know it's a problem, and then tell me about its impact and make it so I can't deny it. That's the piece that I actually haven't done here. There's an undeniable impact to me personally, where I feel like sometimes battles are really hard to win, and I feel like, we should have tighter competition, and it's hard to measure that undeniable impact. But if you can, that's better, because I can say, and the result is, and if I were doing this for a company, I would say, and the result is these players all logged out, and thus you guys had less hours played, and when players play less hours, they buy less premium time, and when they buy less premium time, you make less money, and when you make less money, then, you can't give a sconce that raise so he can get a pool put in the backyard. I don't know what a sconce wants to do. And a sconce, I don't mean to use you as a specific example, but I guess I did. So, getting to that level where you can actually describe an undeniable impact is really hard as players. But if we can do the first two things, that's really cool. Yeah, go ahead, take it away.
I mean, you said you didn't really come up with undeniable evidence, and fair enough, it's the beginning of a conversation.
Yeah.
But when you provide evidence, not only does the way that you provide evidence clarify the problem that you're having, but it also provides insight into what the success criteria of the fix is. Because if the evidence describes the problem, then if you measure after the solution and the evidence is gone, then the problem should be gone, right? So obviously we're not there yet. We haven't fully described this problem. We don't have a smoking gun of this is the exact success metric that would solve the problem. But you know what? You're not that far off for the beginning of this conversation.
I think we've started the conversation really, really well. And again, do I expect World of Warships to turn around and be like, you know what? Boy, by golly, that Clyde guy, he came up with an idea nobody's ever heard of before. I can't wait to fix it or whatever. They're not going to do that necessarily. They've thought of these problems and they have reasons and they don't have to share those with me. I think I said in my video too, I said, no, nobody asked my permission on what they should do to World of Warships, and they shouldn't. But it's cool if we can share their stuff and they can feed that stuff back, and we can do so having described what we experienced well. And so, like you said earlier, anybody can do this, and I encourage you guys to do this stuff too, and do it legitimately, and do it fairly, and do it evidence-based. And I think you'll have a better experience working with the Wargaming crew. They might not be able to do anything about it, right? Publishing houses are not coding houses; they do different things,
and it's probably less immediately satisfying than typing in all caps. This match so imba. See you noobs, and then driving into BCAP. Like, I understand that it's not going to solve your problems, but just realize that if you want to be taken seriously, you should maybe not sail directly into BCAP.
Yeah, exactly. So Ascon says, I have a question or two for your idea. Prodding rebuttal questions in test of the idea. Sounds great. First of all, Ascon, hit us up with your questions. Also, my cheap apartments complex does have a pool. Oh, okay.
But that's not your pool, and that's the reason you don't use it, is what I'm gathering.
You need your own pool, Wisconsin. We got to get you that. We got to get you that raid. So, Wisconsin, if you have questions, or even just discussion points, whatever you got, we'd be happy to talk about them for a bit.
And I feel like chat went for a while, and I hope that chat was having a good time talking to chat. I feel like there were a lot of really good questions.
Yeah.
That maybe could be repeated, and we could talk about those, and we maybe should review our pinned items to talk about if any of them are still relevant.
Do you want to farm chat for good questions while we see what Wisconsin is going to say, and then we can come back to our pinned items as well?
Yurek says, does Jetty's apartment complex have a pool? Mine does have a pool, but much like Wisconsin, it's not my pool, and I don't use it as much as I wish I could.
I do not have a pool. If anyone's curious if Clyde has a pool, I have a bunch of trees I need to cut out of my backyard.
Believe me when I say it not being my pool is something that my neighbors would also comment about if I were to use it more than I do. Just Mick says, is Wargaming going to buy a house in Austin? I feel like we have changed topics just a little bit.
Oh no.
Oh no.
First of all, Wargaming house in Austin would probably be hilarious. I imagine that Gaishu is the guy who lets his dishes soak. No, Bogsy lets his dishes soak, and Gaishu washes them immediately. That's what I think.
Wargaming house, Austin.
That's right, because they already have one in Belgrade and another one.
That's right.
and another one in Prague.
Marangana says, what do you think about a solution that tinkers with team sizes for a shortening of queue times when balancing? So, I mean, I think that we have a lot of different variables at play here. When you change the team size, you have the chance of changing each ship's individual impact on the team. So just an easy example is when you go from 12 ships to 9 or to 6, and a carrier is in play, that carrier is likely to have an outsized impact on a smaller field of possible targets because carriers are balanced in a 12v12. I don't know how important that is, and how would I balance that against the gains to possibly better skill balance across the teams? Which of those do I prefer? I probably would prefer skill, but the problem is that the solution that Clyde has suggested wouldn't change one carrier dunking the other carrier and then dominating a match, right? Because we're talking about averages.
Doesn't even help with that.
Doesn't help at all. So as your player count decreases, those kinds of one-off imbalances become more problematic.
Yeah,
I would not suggest changing player counts as a way of improving queue times in order to get better skill averages. I think that might have unintended consequences.
Yeah, I think you might be able to do it with a little bit of variability. Maybe you drop players as low as 10, but no lower, right? And we already do that, right? With queue dumps, not for skill, but for other reasons, other queue reasons, right?
And the reality is also, before we talk about, how many players is a good number, at the point that we're able to finesse that number up and down, we've already created the core functionality that allows team skills to be balanced against each other. So at that point, you're just configuring the solution, and you've already implemented or proven that you can implement some sort of solution. So maybe we're not there yet.
Yeah. So Sconce has an interesting question, and I think it probably deserves a little exploration. So first of all, Sconce, thanks for sharing your questions. He said the current experience is as random as possible. So it's maximum randomness. It says barring division weighting in a sense. A player's performance, statistics, and long-form experience is all the result of a true random. Creating a weighting means that you are no longer truly reflecting result in a random experience. Do you feel like there's anything lost if you move to a weighted system? Your system, in other words, the thing I proposed, uses the 24 players grabbed, which is random, but shuffles them in a non-random way towards a center. I do think that we lose. I think this might be challenging to measure, and then Jetty, I'll throw it to you too. But I think it might be challenging to measure. But I do think one of the things you could lose is you'd have a less perfect bell curve. Right now, things are fairly random. Like if you looked at a bunch of the graphs that I made in the video, I don't have them all at the immediate ready right here. But if you looked at a bunch of the video or the graphs that I have in that video, a lot of them are bell curves because of pure randomness. And if you start manipulating that randomness in the way that I proposed, which is, well, just grab the worst possible matchups and try to fix them, it'll change the shape of the bell curve. Now, nobody cares about the shape of a bell curve.
That was going to be my comment. Yeah.
Nobody gives a crap about what your bell curve looks like. However, we do care about how much fun we have or don't have, as the case may be. And I can't prove that more even matchups in terms of team performance would be more fun, but I'm pretty sure they would be. Or at least that more of those games would be more fun. I don't know. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, if I imagine the kinds of... So again, the metric that I am using is the fun that I get to have in the game while I am playing the game, right? So if I think about the things that cause me to have fun, and this, of course, varies by person, dunking on somebody because they made a mistake and I was perceptive enough to notice makes me feel good.
That's
nice. As long as it doesn't happen all the time to everyone, it's nice that it happens now and then. Realizing that an opponent is aware of me and having a little one-on-one where we're both dancing in front of each other and we're using the capabilities of our ship, and I probably inflate how well I'm using my capabilities because it feels good to feel good. Like that's something that I enjoy as well. If you have the random mix of people in the pool of 24, both of those experiences still happen. But what we prevent is the case where all of the dunking happens to only one team, or enough of the dunking happens to only one team that team is knocked out of contention. What I don't like is the case where my skill is clearly different from the majority of my team, and I'm forced to choose between either throwing the game so that I can go into the next game quickly, because the rest of my team is also thrown and I feel like my contribution doesn't matter. By the way, that's against EULA, and it's not something I believe in,
No,
but it's something that
definitely
people
would never
feel,
encourage anybody to do that.
yeah, but it's something that people, it occurs to people at times. Or
I've seen it done, right? It's real.
yeah, or sitting through to the bitter end, playing defensively, knowing you can't win for the majority of the match. Both of those things feel terrible.
Now, the knowing you can't win, by the way, is not before the first guns have fired. It's after it's a 9v2, right? Or a 9v3 is what you're talking about, right?
And we, as players, because of our various predictions and biases, we're likely to misattribute the moment when a game is not winnable anymore. But we all perceive those moments when a game is not winnable, and I would like to perceive that less.
Yeah. So Sconce continues, and I want to jump to this because I think it kind of flows nicely with what you're talking about. He said, a different way to consider this is the concept of poker hands. True random gives predictable experiences, but still creates upsets and frustrations. Waiting could be a more reliable expectation, but are you moving away from the varied experience that is out of your control? And this is something I was worried about too. And I think, Sconce, that's a great point, right? Because obviously, many ways we could adjust the way matches are made such that games wind up being very tense. Like some battles, some clan battles in particular, some ranked battles, you're like leaning forward, your muscles are tensed, and you're like, you have to think all the time. And that's not the same kind of fun as, dude, did you just see me citadel that guy for 20,000 damage? Like, those are totally different experiences, both of which can be fun. But if every single game was a stressful, meta-driven mess, that would be a problem. And that's one of the reasons why I think when you switch on the purple box in this drawing right here is a variable value. Maybe you only turn it on when the average XP gap is like 300 or more. And if we go to, not that chart, but this chart, 300 is where we start with 100% win rate of the team better. Again, in my relatively small data set, the world could be different if you had 400,000 battles. But you want to be able to adjust that left or right, in other words, bigger or smaller gaps, based on whether or not we're getting those wild experiences. Because I still want crazy games. I still want Hail Marys. I still want silly fun times. I still want to be able to take, as you said, a meme division and have a good time, and even maybe win a game from time to time, right? I want those experiences, so we don't want to go too far. And I think what Sconce described in his secondary comment there is, what if we went too far? And my answer to that would be, well, dial it back, dude. You did it wrong, right? And how do you learn that? You got to try it. You know, you don't know what the number is really. Go ahead.
I gotta say, I disagree with you, Clyde. I mean, so yeah. There's parts that I agree with and parts that I disagree with. The thing that I agree with is this is configurable. Once you make it possible for Wargaming to determine the metrics that they think matters, whether or not their metrics we know, once Wargaming decides which metrics matter, and once Wargaming decides that balancing those metrics as a last-minute balance check is worth the effort, we can configure how much variability we want to accept, and we can finesse that so that it feels good. But I disagree that the balancing between teams will diminish the kinds of games that you're talking about. The games where you have one person that has a heroic effort, that's going to happen just as often because you have the same high and low performers in every match. The games where one person pulls it out at the end after appearing to like they're losing, that's going to happen just as often because you still have the same high and low performers. You still have the issue of which flank they're on and how they interact with map mechanics. Like, we're not actually, I think there's a risk here of assuming that we're getting more uniformity than we're suggesting. We're not going to get uniformity where everyone suddenly plays in a cautious and predictable and advisable way. You're still going to have incredible potatoes and outrageous super unicum divs, and some of those super unicum divs are going to be on a team and they're going to dominate entire fields. But it's not going to be the case that if you have 3 super unicum divs, they all appear on the same side, because that happens right now.
Yeah,
And when
it
3
does.
Super Unicum divs appear on the same side, I don't even have to wait for the match to start to know what the outcome is. That's not good.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I think, you know, I suppose I was making a bit of an. First of all, I appreciate that you're like, you know what, I disagree, and I'm going to tell you why. First of all, that was awesome. That's why I wanted to have this conversation. And then secondly, I think we might see a slight reduction in that kind of stuff happening if those players are split up a little bit more evenly. You might see, and this is a big might, by the way. I've got no data to back this up. You might see teams of players responding to enemy operations actions, things that they're doing a little bit more uniformly. I think you could still spawn in, and spawn locations are still random, by the way. I haven't talked about changing those. So maybe all of your better players are on the west flank and your lesser players on the east flank, and it's opposite for the enemy team. So you have this big swirling combat. I think you'll still get some of the chaos. I don't think you're wrong there. I was sort of making the assumption that on the whole, teams would behave a little bit more uniformly, but individuals would not. And that's your point, if I'm willing to put those words in your mouth, if you're willing to allow me. And that's big, because that allows for a lot of that chaos. And we love chaos. I love it when somebody steps out from an island and I, for some reason, have a battleship ready to go and I just pump them full of AP, and it's just like, yes, you have made an error, and as you said earlier, I have capitalized on it because of my incredible skill or my luck for being here, right? Those are great moments, and we don't want those to go away. We want World of Warships to be exciting and fun and kinetic, very kinetic. You've been waiting, I can tell, to say stuff.
Yeah, to Escanza's point, I appreciate that the game direction may be, just as it says on the TIM, to make a random experience with some reasonably well-matched fleet compositions, but for the experience itself to be as random as possible. And I think that you can respect that randomness without allowing it to get stacked. I think that doesn't disrespect the random intent. That's
exactly the goal of this proposal, is to keep the randomness, because I think that's good, and then try to identify the worst possible cases and make them better, right? Make them less worst case.
And to the poker example, it's true that all the hands might be random, but the players at the table aren't, or it's a really boring poker game. So I'm not sure that poker is the best example to apply to this. I can see why it was used, but I don't think that it's necessarily the best analogy.
It's not a perfect analogy, but it does it does draw your mind directly to the full randomness that we have today, even though there are still some rules that make it not perfectly random, right? But I see where Escance went with that, and I think it's a reasonable way to frame the question so that we understood how to answer it, or at least come back to it. But Jurok says, would you want skill-based, and then we'll grab Escance's second question, would you want skill-based matchmaking in all game modes, or would it be limited to maybe ranked or some special modes? I think if we did skill-based matchmaking, which is not what we have right here above my head on the screen, then I would just put that in ranked and maybe clan battles or something. I don't think I'd put that in all the modes. What do you think, Jetty?
I think arguably a form of skill-based matchmaking occurs already in clan battles. It's not perfect, but I think I'd agree. You could make an argument that it occurs. I think that we've described ranked as a very blunt instrument that pretends to be skill-based matchmaking, but doesn't really qualify, and uses some substitutions for that. And I would love to see ranked become more skill-based matchmaking, and I can understand why it's not. If those two had a skill-based matchmaker, I would no longer ask for it to be in randoms, because if I really wanted to test my skill, I would have a mode in which I could do it. The problem I have right now is that if I go to ranked, I don't feel like ranked tests my skill. I don't feel like it establishes my skill. I don't have access to an MMR that I can use to judge my progress or match me against players of my skill. None of those things happen in ranked right now. They kind of happen in clan battles and nowhere else.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a pretty good kind of way of taking a look at where we would want to apply that kind of concept. But your comment about clan battles having skill-based matchmaking, it's the best skill-based matchmaker we have in the game, and I think you'd agree with that statement. Pausing for response.
Of the ones we have, for sure.
Of the ones that exist today, it's definitely the best. Escance has another interesting question. I think this is one that I feel like he and I maybe have chatted about a little bit before, or maybe it's come up on streams and I just feel like we've had this conversation, but it's a good one. and I'm legitimately about to run out of voice, but here we go. The game is extremely complex. The amount of different ships, capabilities, positions means that we likely have a spread of skill that is stunning. I agree. That being said, true random means that even the worst player on Earth can experience a massive high, and the best player on Earth can find themselves stalled. In your opinion, is random more accommodating? Oh, this is interesting. This is slightly different than I thought it was. Is random more accommodating across skill possibilities? If so, would potentially sacrificing that variance affect player investment? Okay, so I think there's a few different ways to talk about this. One of the things that kind of jumped out at me would be, if we do this, and again, we're just talking about grabbing the most egregious matchups, right? The worst possible matchups. If we did this, and we saw the metric we use to measure a player's skill change as a result of this kind of a thing, I think the metrics would still be good, but I think what's interesting here is random more accommodating across skill possibilities? In other words, does random make the player experience better for all players, or does it not leave some players behind? One of the things that I think players do in World of Warships is they talk about the game as though their perspective is the only one that matters. I was at the USS Iowa. What is that called where they go to ships? Anchors Away. I was at the Anchors Away event, and we had players asking questions of Mara Draco and of Conception, and all of those players asked questions about things that, you know, that's their most important thing. We had a really great player. Lord Admiral, thanks for the sub, dude. I appreciate it. That's a wonderful thing you've done. I appreciate you so much. Thank you. We had a player who was very interested in competitive play, clan battles, and tournaments, and he asked a bunch of questions about that. And I think they were good questions, to be fair. But his questions often were about, like, hey, how can Wargaming and how can World of Warships more accommodate players like me who care about this stuff? We had other players who were up there and they were like, hey, I have a complaint about, you know, submarines or whatever they wanted to gripe about. What's the best way to make sure that I get heard? Because my opinion is really important. And to be fair, player opinion is important. I'm not saying it's not. But everybody kind of comes out with their own perspective. And so Escanzo's question here is really interesting to me, because he basically says, is having things be fully random more accommodating for players across all skill possibilities? And I'm trying to not answer this question just from my perspective, but think about all players, like the elite players, 75% win rate super unicums, and players who struggle to have a 40% win rate, because those people are out there and they're real people and they're playing World of Warships. If I put my business hat on, they're customers, right? And they're our community members, whether or not you resonate with them or not. They're your community members. I'm smack in the middle, so it's easy for me to look both directions and still not understand either group. I want to say that I think it would be okay. I think if we amended the poorest matchups, there might be cases where the algorithm would be like, man, what do I do with this player that has a 38% win rate? How do I put that? What team do I put them on? Like, if you swapped a dude with a 78% win rate and a guy with a 38% win rate across on different teams to try to bring more balance to the force, as it were, I think, first of all, I think that's fine as long as the teams were more balanced using the metrics we have today, right? I'm only using externally available metrics. I think that wouldn't be the end. I don't know, Jetty, what do you think? Are we going to ruin the experience for a player on one end of the spectrum or not?
So short answer from Jetty is a hard no.
Hard no. Says, let's talk about how hard that is. Go for
hard,
it.
Definitive. I'm gonna put my foot down. No. Okay. Before I say hard no, like, I do think there's something to unpack here. True random means that even the worst player on Earth can experience a massive high, and the best player on Earth can find themselves stalled. That's true, but if we want to talk about whether that will or won't happen, we should first define what causes a worst player on Earth to experience that high. What is it that makes them so happy? Because if we know what makes them happy, or if we can give some examples of what makes them happy, we can talk about whether those examples of things are more or less likely to happen. I think that this doesn't diminish high and low skill players' access to match, right? Because they're still part of the 24 player pool. Their access to match, their queue time is unaffected. Their ability to face off against and team up with the widest possible range of teammates and opponents is unaffected, because you still have the exact same
That's
pool.
true.
You're just changing the average or whatever metric is decided so that, point C, the outcome isn't predetermined. In my opinion, if the outcome is not predetermined, you still have access to the full range of random skill distributions, and your access to the game is not being changed. You can't possibly have a worse outcome. And if I've misunderstood you, Askance, if you have maybe some examples of a massive high that the worst player on earth can have because the teams are imbalanced, then maybe you can give a little bit of detail for that. But I don't see that as a risk.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think, and again, it could be that we're misunderstanding the question, or there's some aspect of it that Askance is 2 steps ahead of us on too. And I think the early in your statement, one of the things you said hits that appropriately, which says you're still going to get to play with the same variety of players. They just may or may not be on your team, even though the match maybe said they were. If I drop into a match and John the Ruthless is on the other team, but due to a matchmaking swappy, now he's on my team. First of all, I never knew that he was supposed to be on the other team or whatever. Good for me. My team needed help, right? Now, if it swaps me and John the Ruthless, first of all, I'm slightly offended. But second of all, that might just be the way the math works, right? Maybe I was the best player to swap over there. But I still get to play in a match against a player of that caliber and that skill. They may or may not be on my team. And if that takes me away from having a game where there's a 400 or 500 average XP, gap. By the way, first of all, let me throw this chart up. That's a really helpful thing. This is the chart that I haven't shown yet, actually. So the top half of this just talks, it's a non-cumulative version of the chart I already showed you. The bottom half of this shows the number of battles in the study that had an average average account XP gap in each one of these things. So 0 to 50 is about 80 battles. Some bug in my office, it's driving me crazy. But when you look at that, I had one battle in my 333 where there was an average account XP gap of over 500. And I had 13 battles over 300, right? I mean, we can look at these and go, boy, those are big gaps, right? Or go ahead.
I was just saying, you can take, so when I look at a graph like this, I see a gap between 150 to 200 and 200 to 250. And we say, okay, well, what if we put an arbitrary line at the 200 mark? That's 60% of all the games in your sample
Something like
have
that.
over 200 points difference in the average team XP. And you go up and you say, if you arbitrarily cut it at 200 points, scroll up for me.
Yes, I will. I will do that. So here's 200. It's an 80.7% win rate in that bucket. 200 to 250, 201.
So games over 200 are at least 80% correlated with wins and losses in advance. That's
too much, right?
An uncomfortable amount of correlation. Yeah. I should not be able to predict by any publicly published metric, and there have got to be private ones that are better than this. We keep saying this, but this is a publicly available app. You install a mod and you are given these details right away. I know in advance that I have an 80% chance of winning, or better, up to 100% chance of winning in some of these cohorts. That feels really bad when I could have the same mix of opponents, the same mix of teammates, 2 or 3 people swap so that the imbalances are not all going the same direction. And as a result, the time I spend might have meaning. That's true whether I'm a low skill player, my time has meaning. As a high skill player, my time has meaning. As a medium skill player, my time has meaning, because the game is not preordained.
Yeah. Sconce dropped a great comment in here that I want to address as well. He says, to give some context, and this primes an interesting conversation. He says, and you've just dropped a new comment that I haven't read yet. The world's greatest swordsman doesn't fear the world's second greatest swordsman. He fears the world's worst swordsman, because he has no idea what the fool will do, I think is what that's supposed to say. A low skill player in a random environment will land a surprising amount of torpedoes in game, or be in a strange place that was unexpected, or get a dev strike or two as a result. Absolutely. And then Sconce goes on to say, effectively, the question is, the game is extremely hard. Reducing variance makes a more understandable game, but it makes it less likely for an outlier big win. So one thing I'll throw out too is I haven't really prescribed the algorithm that happens in the purple box. Because I haven't written this code and I'm not getting paid to, and we're probably not going to do it, right? So the algorithm in the purple box needs to look at two teams and figure out which one is better. And then this is pseudocode that I'm giving you right now. If you guys aren't coders, pseudocode is basically describing an algorithm so that people can write it, right? So we can understand what it's supposed to do before we go write it. So first of all, it needs to look at the two teams, determine which one is better. It needs to look at the difference in performance of the two teams, determine if it's above the spec, the allowable tolerance. In other words, if the gap is so big that we have to do something about it. The third stage is taking a look at the team members and figuring out which ones to swap. This is actually kind of tricky, if I'm being honest with you. I don't think it's immediately easy where you just take the lowest guy on this team and the highest guy on that team and you swap them and then you check all the numbers again. That's a very inefficient way to do this. And one of the things that Eskance is pointing out, or maybe not directly, but one of the things I'm going to say because of what Eskance has pointed out, is the way that we distribute players across the two teams at that stage can be very simple, or it can be a little bit less simple. It could be a little more complex. We could find out that, hey, we got a 150 point gap. We want it to be 128 points. And we could pick two players that have a gap in performance enough that'll correct that and do that swap. Or we could say, can we make sure that there's kind of a high to medium to low to just figuring the game out because they just got a new account, like a range on both teams. That's more complicated. And I'm not proposing that needs to be done. But it's a way that could make sure that the teams have a good mix of both high skill and low skill and medium plus and medium minus skill players, so that we have the matchups that Eskance is talking about. Because Eskance, that's a good point. We do have some really crazy notes in there. There are some really crazy things that can happen because of what you just said in your note there. Eskance says, I love the video. Thanks to you, Eskance. That's very cool.
Yeah. It's really easy.
Yeah, go ahead, Jetty, please.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, I'm
cut you
done.
off.
I'm done.
It's really easy to go off the deep end and imagine all of the ways that we could make the match as balanced as possible. And correct me if I'm wrong, Clyde, but I don't think that's what you're proposing. The goal here is not to make the match as balanced as possible. The goal that I perceive is to prevent the most egregious cases of predetermined outcomes. And it's probably the case that the vast majority of players will never know that this happened because they aren't tuned into forums or discords or streams. They just play clicky boats. So maybe their experience is unaltered. Maybe they don't really know why, but it feels a little bit better. And that I would love for that to be the outcome. For those of us who are paying attention, we may always feel like a game was going to be a raffle stomp from the very beginning. But if we were to measure it, and these public measuring tools are out here, we would say, oh, wow, you know what? We measured our feeling, and these games aren't predestined. And this is just randomness. Randomness sometimes feels like there's patterns where none exist. But the feeling is a problem. And the feeling is strong. And it has caused people to turn to mods like Matchmaking Monitor. It's caused people to obsess about win rates. It's caused so many different threads about skill-based matchmaker, which I think we've talked about are beside the point.
Yeah.
And a simple and limited solution can prevent the most egregious cases which happen too much without changing the mix of players involved, without changing their ability to match, without changing their ability to experience a wide range of skill levels, probably without them even noticing. Certainly you wouldn't want to publish that, which players swapped teams, because that would be terrible. But you would want to take a limited perspective on this, certainly.
Yeah, agree. Cypher says, I completely disagree with that. I think he's talking about Escance's random outliers comment on general application. The variable of the unskilled player is going to be the variable that the unskilled player is going to do something unpredictable is way outside what happens in a game to be an outlier. So balancing the game for a random outlier versus the rest of the player base, question mark. I think that's a reasonable comment to make, Cypher. I do think that those moments, though rare, are probably pretty wacky and wild, and they're memorable and all that. But I think, first of all, we wouldn't lose them all. I think we'd still have them. And then B, I kind of do agree with you that we wouldn't want to be like, let's make this weird edge case something that constrains our design space. And to be fair, I don't think Ensconce was suggesting that. He's asking a question so that the conversation is interesting. And so, again, I think, don't, Ensconce, if you disagree, if you're like, no, I really wanted to do that, then go ahead and correct me. I'll tell you about an experience I had, and I won't tell you who the player is or anything, but I had an opportunity, I don't know, it was a year ago, maybe, it was a while back, to div with a player from 07. And we hung out and we played in div. We got on voice together and we were playing together. And I've already told you, I'm like a flyover state when it comes to a player. I'm a very average player. I'm green on matchmaking monitor. So for those of you guys who use that, I think my win rate is 53%, right? 53 and a quarter. So I am not the kind of player who normally divs with somebody from 07. And we went and we played some matches together. And the player said, hey, would you like some advice about stuff? And I said, sure, let me know what you think. And we played a few matches, and he's like, yeah, you gotta not do this, and maybe you should do this, and gave me some good advice, and it was cool. And then at the end, we played a bunch of matches, and we lost a bunch of matches. And I win matches more often when I play by myself or with my friends. And this player won matches more often when they played with their friends or their players. And they said to me, I have no idea how to play with you because I can't tell what you're gonna do, because I don't play like his 07 friends. This was back when 07 hadn't split into resin and whatever the other glue-based clan is. He says, I can't figure out how to help you play games, right? Because I don't know what you're gonna do, because I'm that really terrible swordsman in terms of scope and scale for this player. And he's like, I just had no idea. It was very unpredictable, even though we're sitting here on chat, and it was really interesting. No, we've chatted since then, Katsios. But it was really interesting to talk about the game in those different perspectives, because they are just very different across these skill cohorts that we know exist, but we haven't really engaged with in a direct way, because you tend to play with players like yourself. At least I think that's true anyway. Jetty, we're going to go to Ensconce's last question here. Or at least he said it was his last question. We'll see if there's another one below. It says, last question, if matchmaking is altered using outliers and that results in drawing those outliers closer together, winning adds 50% base XP, so creating closer average base XP is likely to be more constant win rate per results. Have you considered what that will be in the next form of metric that would be used as the monitored outlier? So I think what you're talking about, Ensconce, is saying that when you win, you get more base XP. And so if we did something that did like a compression that looked kind of like this, where we wound up having our bell curve get a little taller in the middle and a little shorter on the edges, would that start modifying players' base XP such that you'd have to choose a new metric? Maybe. But I also think that maybe average account base XP isn't the metric that I would use if I was the coder for this. I would use a different metric. So I think yes is probably the answer. It would affect it and it would change its effectiveness over time. But I feel like that isn't what I would use if I was really going to sit down and crack my knuckles and code this up. Jetty, you jumped in there. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've said a number of times that just because a metric is published and exists and is part of the video you suggested doesn't mean that the metric is sacred or holy or should not be changed or should not be replaced. Like, I could see an argument where Wargaming says, look, here's the metric that we find correlates to winning games, right? And base XP is kind of that, but not really. We know that there are cases where base XP has been modified for economic reasons. This ship would earn too much base XP, and that results in too much silver and too much commander XP. And as a result, we're nerfing the base XP earnings that this ship has. Like, that happens for economic reasons, which suggests between that and the fact that winning gives more XP and the fact that premium gives more XP, that base XP, despite being the metric that Clyde has identified, may not be the best choice.
Oh, yeah.
And I would encourage and welcome a more accurate metric that Wargaming, like this is Wargaming's chance to suggest, based on their understanding of the game, what metric actually makes sense. And you could use one metric to prevent skill gaps from controlling outcomes, and leave the community to use its preferred mix of metrics, as you already see on things like Matchmaking Monitor and WoW's skill
the invented
websites.
PR, which is not a real wargaming metric, you know. Yeah.
We've invented all of these metrics in the absence of one that we believe in. We've invented a bunch and they're all flawed, and you can just leave us to our flawed metrics while having one that you trust. Or you can publish the one that you trust and what makes it, and you can give it to us. If you trust us to, you know, to poke it with holes and not excoriate you with all these, you know, complaints, or maybe you don't care about the complaints, I would love to know the metric that Wargaming thinks correlates to battle contribution, independent of economics, independent of winning, independent of premium. If that's available, I would welcome it. And if you choose to use it but not make it available, then by any metric we could possibly invent, if we were to run this test again, we shouldn't be able to find a correlation regardless of the metric we choose, right? So it wouldn't matter. You can leave us to our own devices, or you can give us a gift. But in any case, I don't think that it's a problem that the existing metrics that are in the wild today are altered. I don't think that's a problem at all.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree. First of all, Katsios. I think Katsios was being sarcastic. We know that Wargaming people play the game like crazy.
I mean, that any metric they suggest would get player feedback, so that's not a problem either.
Yeah, absolutely. If they came out with something, players would be like starting things on fire and knocking over school buses. It'd be awesome to see what people would say. But yeah, Katsuya says, oh, don't let them choose. They don't even play the game. We know that's not true. A lot of them play on servers that we don't have access to, though, right? You got to remember, developers are playing on development builds that are running on servers that nobody here has access to. Plus, we know players like Askance, who's here, has thousands of games, and Lord of Droid has thousands of games. Seraphis has thousands of games. I think Katsius was just being silly, though. I do want to jump in. Jirac said, well, hang on. Could you get access to the average base XP without the win modifier? Wargaming could. Wargaming has that number. So the way that the economics work, so there's two problems, actually. And you talked about one briefly. Askance brought up the victory question, which is when you win, you get 50% bonus XP, which is absolutely true. Thanks, Katsios. I figured as much. You absolutely get a bonus. Now, granted, my numbers and my testing and my data here on this thing, they all took into account the fact that people who win get a 50% bonus. That was part of the average account base XP number that I have, and it still was an accurate predictor. The other thing that's a problem, and I talked about this a little bit in the video, is that at present, premium time is factored into your base XP as well. And the numbers available on WoW's Monitor, as far as I know, do not provide base XP without your premium time modifier, which means that players who spend money have a higher average base XP than players who do not, even if they are worse players, in some cases at least. Even if they play exactly the same, a player who has premium time more often will have a higher average base XP. Even given that fact, account average base XP as provided by WoW's Monitor, or Matchmaking Monitor, was able to predict games very accurately, far more accurately than it should have been able to. Right.
It just means that. So, sorry.
No, I was just gonna for Jar's question. So Wargaming has those numbers in a database somewhere, or if they don't have them now, they could insert a new table and store all that data, and they would then have those numbers. So yes, I just don't have access to that data myself, but Wargaming certainly does. Go ahead, Jetty.
It just means that our imperfect number here is an aggregation of a whole bunch of things that maybe could be separated from each other and maybe can't be. It's a combination of spotting and damage and capping and cap defense and playing damage and all of those things that we know affects base XP, and also level of investment that caused you to buy premium, and also your previous experience that caused you to win more, and also like, so there's a whole bunch of things aggregated in this number. And I guess my takeaway, my bottom line is, it doesn't matter how many things were aggregated into this number, because the correlation clearly works. It works at a disturbingly high degree. So if there's a better number than this that has an even higher correlation, use it instead. If you want to separate out some of these variables and remove the ones that don't correlate, I welcome it.
Please
but the fact
do.
that any sort of measure can create these sort of correlations is broadly concerning.
And for those of you guys who haven't watched the video and you think these charts are like nerdy and cool or whatever, I have a chart for all of the metrics, all 6 of them, the ones in ships, the ones in accounts, and then XP, win rate, and battle count. And it shows what a good metric is and a bad metric is. It walks through all that math. If you like this talk and you've been hanging out with me and Jetty for a long time and you haven't watched that video, you would probably like the video and you'd learn some neat things about how some of those metrics, battle count, I'm going to spoil it for you. Battle count right now, terrible predictor of whether or not your team is going to win. Obviously, clicking the battle button is not a skill that makes you win more games, right? Hitting shots at range and things like that, capping points, those things help you win. Go ahead.
Yeah, which is why people say, oh my God, you're at tier 10. Shouldn't you know better by now? And that's completely beyond the point. Someone has reached tier 10 because they've hit the battle button often enough, or maybe they've purchased a premium. That has nothing to do with skill. And I love how your analysis underlines that fact, that there are measures we can take from publicly available data that are correlatable, and there are measures that aren't. And we shouldn't just assume which ones count, because that's a dumb way to do this. We should measure them and reject the bad.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, how do you know, right? You got to have an answer to that question. Shandar says Wargaming should have a queue for premium and one for regular players. I don't see why, if they can make more money, they couldn't do that. I mean, they could, but we already talked about how small the queue is, and I feel like that's probably not good for creating community. I'd rather not stratify the game by finances, personally. But so I would probably not encourage Wargaming to take something like that, personally. Angelic Cypher said some really nice things about both you and me. You should read them. Good conversation, though. Thank you, Angelic Cypher said. I love the conversation. Thanks for you and FoamingJetty taking some of your time and sharing your insights. And by the way, guys, we said this at the top of the discussion. And by the way, we've been doing this forever. I'm actually surprised we're still going, but I'm also not surprised at all. We are not experts on this. I've never worked in software development for games. I have worked in software development, but not for games. I don't know a ton about matchmaking algorithms. I'm not I'm a guy who plays a lot of World of Warships, and I'd like to think that I can sometimes do some analytical thinking. Jetty, you're not a professional in the gaming industry, I don't believe.
I have to strongly disagree with you, Clyde.
Go ahead.
I am 100% professional in the things that make me feel bad.
In the things that make you feel okay, good. And all about that. That's been your whole life's experience or whatever. Oh no. Oh no.
You're right. Like, we're not claiming to be professionals. We're not claiming to be experts. Our conversations about other games don't come from a place of like guru-ness, just from a place of this is how we've experienced games in general. Here's how our experiences in these games are similar or different. Here's the limitations we know exist, and we've identified a bunch of limitations that we know we probably can't see.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to try to pronounce this. I'm sorry. Is it Mucius Varo? First of all, welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed the discussion so far. This is already a YouTube video that you can go watch right now. This is a follow-on conversation. So Mucius, there's the comment, or there's the YouTube video. So pop that open in your browser, give it a watch a little bit later. This goes into all the data and the math and everything, and hopefully that's kind of going to scratch the itch you're hoping for. We'd certainly love to have you go watch that as well. But yeah, we're not professionals. We're just folks who think a lot about this game. And what I wanted to do was kind of come in here and talk a little bit about, what the conversation Jetty started by leaving a comment on the YouTube video, and make sure that we just kind of talked it through and and provided a forum for people to jump in and share some comments. I know that we missed tons of comments, guys. So if you missed your chance to get comments out there, you can certainly reach out to both myself and Jetty on our respective Discords. I don't have a command that drops your Discord link in there, Jetty, but that's mine, and we'll get that to you. Sconce, I will post this on my YouTube channel as well. You do not need to listen to this whole thing until you're off vacation, unless you're just fascinated. I would strongly caution you that the first half of this, we're just like, I don't know, games, and we're all over the place. And hopefully, at some point it settles in. So if we're a little, wandery early in the VOD, that's probably why, as we're starting to find our way to having this conversation. Jurek says, what is good though is despite not being professionals, etc., the feelings you have are still valid because it's the experience that you have had and a comparison. That's exactly true. And that's kind of what we wanted to get to, which is making sure we were talking through our observations. And if there's problems with it, if there are other ways to look at this, we're inviting you guys to engage with us in conversation. We want you to do that and let us know what you think, right? So if you're watching this on YouTube later, first of all, and you got all the way here, I think we're like 3 hours into this discussion, which is insane. You can absolutely hit us up in the comments down below. Like I said, join our Discords and come join us. I'll put a link to Jetty's Discord if he lets me in the YouTube video. And Jetty, if you have a link that you want to drop in chat, you can either get that over to Marangana or myself, and we'll drop that in there for the folks right now.
Yeah, I just hit it to you.
Oh, perfect. Great. Thank you, sir. I would love to have you guys join Jetty's Discord and spend time with these wonderful humans that hang out over with Jetty on his Discord channel as well, our Discord server as well. Thanks, everybody. I think we're done. B. Crisp said, Clyde, you're so full of it. You're the most analytical CC on this station. I guess you mean on twitch.tv/Clyde Plays Live? Yeah, that's probably true. I will tell you guys, there are a lot of really great minds in the CC program. And a lot of them hang out on this channel, and some of them don't. And then, of course, we've got really great community managers that work with World of Warships. And so we have fantastic conversations that often take place in channels that are covered by NDAs. There's a bunch of stuff I wanted to say in today's video that I can't. But the things that we can, we absolutely want to make sure that we have in an open forum like this. So most analytical CC, maybe not, but I might be the one that spends most time doing homework and making it on YouTube for people.
Doggedly determined.
I don't know about that, but
no, I will say, this is a feeling that I've had frequently. The suggestion you make is a suggestion that I've thought about, but I haven't taken the time to really carefully verbalize it, right? So you not only verbalize a suggestion that's been bouncing around in my head, that's probably been bouncing around in a lot of people's head, but what's better,
yeah, it's not totally unique. Yeah,
you made a strong case for pros and cons and costs and impacts, and most importantly, the base problem, the feeling that we have that is the reason we're having this conversation in the first place, and that's not rare.
Yeah, no, well, I appreciate that again. Thank you. That's very kind of you. Lord Admiral says, can we have, what did you say? You said, can we have this experience again soon, TM? I don't know. So this kind of concept of this fireside chat is the kind of stream that I'd like to do more often. I don't always have cool things to talk about. It took me 3 months, probably, maybe 4 months to make the YouTube video. And so it's tough sometimes to have one every week. I don't think we could do it that frequently, but I think if there are interesting topics that come up and we have interesting folks who want to be guests on the program, that's something that we could absolutely do, and I would love to do that. So that's something that I'm sure we'll see again. So I don't think this will be our last fireside chat, but I do think that I can't tell you when the next one is going to be. But I have had ideas and thoughts about doing this kind of program for a long time. We're still going to do ship shows with Skada, and Skada could be on this program as well if there's something he and I just want to get together, but maybe it's not specifically about ships, it's just about World of Warships. So we may have that going on, but definitely we'll do more conversations on this kind of thing. Pac Manly, Skada has been trying to get me to put some of our long form videos on a podcast for a while, and that would be cool. I haven't gotten it done yet. I don't know if podcast is a thing I want to add to my schedule, but it might be a thing where you could at least have an RSS feed to get this kind of content. The best thing you can do if you like this kind of discussion is join or go follow my YouTube channel, which is where this kind of stuff winds up eventually. So this is going to be on YouTube as well, and you guys can certainly check it out there, and go check out the other content that's up there, some of which is shorter form and some of it is longer form. So if you're not doing that yet and you'd like to be a part of it, feel free to do so. Jetty, can you tell people where it is they can find you online again? Because as conversation partners go, there are a few, I think, that match your thoughtfulness and things like that. So if you wouldn't mind letting people know where they can find your delicious flavor of internet chat, I'm sure they would love to know that.
Yeah, that is very sweet. My name is FoamingJetty. I stream on Twitch. If you'd like to follow my channel, the easiest way to do it, because you are here right now, is to click on the @FoamingJetty in the title of the stream. It'll give you a little pop-up to my stream, and you can follow me right there if you'd like. Otherwise, it's twitch.tv/FoamingJetty. I play World of Warships. I play a variety of other games. We're just trying to be chill and have a good time, share that good time with other people. If you'd like to see my games on YouTube, they're not nearly as thoughtful and careful as you might get from Clyde Plays Live, but I do have some of my whoever this guy who is this guy? Yeah, I know. I do have some games that I played with my commentary. Some of them are played live, some of them have commentary after the fact. I don't have the posting frequency of Clyde or the long form of Clyde, but you'll find a couple of fun games there, and I'd love to see you in either place. We've already linked my Discord. You'll see me on Clyde's stream often. I like hanging out here. I like playing games. We have these random chats, and it's always funny to hear chat say, "Oh my gosh, we're having a Clyde and Jetty conversation right now," and it's always a treat, because it's often the Clyde and Scotta conversation. Occasionally it's Clyde and Jetty conversation. It's always fun to participate.